There's no time that I've been in my professional life that I've been like, SAT's really prepping me for this.
Okay.
Thank God I took those.
I'm going to call to order at 7:03. This the January 31st, 2022 meeting of the Westford School Committee. Welcome everybody, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're on to the consent agenda. I'm just checking. I think everything that we see here was in the packet, so we've all seen that. I'll start with a motion. Anyone want to make a motion?
Motion to approve the consent agenda as outlined in the January 31st meeting agenda.
Second.
Okay, any discussion or questions?
All good.
Great. All in favor? Very nice. That passes unanimously 5-0. And with that, we will move on to public comment. I'm going to look, I know we have some folks that may be watching at home. If you're on YouTube, you can't make public comment, or WestfordCAT website, but if you hop over to Zoom, and the link is in the agenda, you can. So, and those of you in Zoom, I'll keep an eye out for hands there. And I know we have some folks here in person, so come on up. Thank you. Yeah, if you start with your name and address, and no, you can sit, have a seat, be comfortable.
Obviously, I'm not a rookie.
That's your mic right there. And just a reminder, I know, and you guys know that we just talked about this in the hall, but you know, we have how much time? 10 minutes allotted, but we'll see how it goes if there's more people, and we're asking people to stick to 2 minutes, and I know that you know that and that you're prepared.
Thank you. My name is Russell Coward. I'm an English teacher at WA, and I live at 101 Forge Village Road here in town, close to the high school. Nice commute. I'm speaking on behalf of the WA English Department, and we are expressing our concern over the budget proposal to cut staffing in the department by 1.6 teachers. Leadership has presented to you what these cuts will save. We would like to ask you and the public to consider what these cuts will cost. We teach our students to think critically, write clearly, and communicate effectively. We have guided our students to consistently high performances on standardized testing. In 2019, the state of Massachusetts identified 67 schools encompassing elementary, middle, and high schools as schools recognized for strong MCAS achievement. Westford Academy was one of those schools. Our 10th grade ELA MCAS scores that year reflected 84% of students either exceeding or meeting expectations. Within that, 31% exceeded expectations. That same year, 98.5% of our AP literature test takers scored a 3 or higher, with 40% of those scoring a 5 on the exam. In addition, through differentiation and modification, we support a growing number of students on IEPs and 504s. We prepare our students for success in many different academic arenas. The superintendent maintains that we can still provide adequate teaching for our courses while absorbing increased class sizes that will reflect a 25-to-1 student-to-teacher ratio. However, those increased ratios combined with a new WA schedule that decreases our total amount of class and prep time, what we cannot provide is this consistent practice of writing and the detailed, timely feedback at the same rates that we have maintained thus far. A 25-to-1 student-to-teacher ratio might not seem like a big increase per class, but in aggregate, that is a student-to-teacher ratio of 125-to-1. The National Council of Teachers of English maintains an official position that secondary teachers of English should have a student-to-teacher ratio of 100-to-1 for improved academic performance and student engagement. English teachers are often frontline ambassadors when it comes to recognizing and supporting our students' social and emotional needs and concerns. More students means less time for personal attention. Less time for personal attention worries us, especially after the educational and emotional disruptions caused by the pandemic. We recognize the fiscal realities of our town's budget situation, but we believe that cutting the high school faculty by that many positions will be far more costly to everyone. Thank you very much for your time and attention, guys.
Thanks. Thanks for that perspective, and thanks for coming out. Any other comment from the room? Any other comment from Zoom? Okay, we have somebody that I'm going to bring in. I think. I tried. there we go. Diane, you are now, you're a panelist in the webinar, so if you unmute, we should be able to hear you.
I can. Good evening, everybody. Diane Wood. Just a reminder, I know you've heard it many times, but we do have a town survey out there that addresses attendance at town meeting. Just a reminder for all of you to have your voices heard. Click on the link. We have almost 700 entries and responses. We're trying to get representation of the whole community, so please take a second. We did notice that over the weekend, because of the storm, we had a lot of responses fill in from last week. So the survey's still there. Valerie is leading this effort under the Access to Town Meeting Committee, and that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Diane.
The link is on the town website.
I don't see any other hands online. I don't see anyone else coming to the mic here in person, so thank you all. And that will end public comment and move us into informational updates. And we will begin with the superintendent update.
Sure. So we want to give an update on the two principal searches, the Stony Brook principal and the Miller principal. In talking about establishing the two different searches, one of the things that we decided to do is Dr. Cleary and I are dividing and conquering, chairing those. So she's going to chair the Stony Brook search. We're both going to participate in both of them, but she's chairing that process, and she's already sent notifications to the staff and to parents looking for interested parties to volunteer to participate on the advisory committee. And I sent similar letters to the Miller staff and to Miller parents as well. The Stony Brook dates, can you remember where it's after the vacation?
For starting,
For the actual where the interview process is going to take place. I think it's that week after vacation. Or is
that's
it the
right,
week after that?
because we are on school spring, and the job application, the posting is open until the week before vacation, so those are trickling in as we speak.
And if there are parents or staff who haven't submitted a letter of interest to Dr. Cleary, that needs to happen by this Friday.
Yes, the
From
4th.
Stony Brook. The Miller timeline is exactly 1 week later. So we're gonna do those interviews the week after the Stony Brook interviews, and the timeline for people to reach out to me, parents or staff, would be next Friday.
Can I ask for people at home who might be interested, the timing of these kind of interviews, or when parents maybe need to be available if they want to take part? Are they during working hours, in the evening?
They're in the afternoon, so they're afternoon after the school is out, so
Around between 2:30 and 5:30.
right, the Miller time is adjusted for the elementary school hours, so it's gonna start at 3:30, whereas the middle school would start at 2:30. And so the committees will consist of me, Dr. Cleary, another administrator, 2 parents, 2 staff members. Is that?
That's right, a fellow principal.
Right, yeah. So that's where we're at in that process. They've been posted on School Spring, as Dr. Cleary said. And so, so the only difference is that week timeline. So one will take place that first week back after vacation, and then the Miller process will take place the week after that.
Great. Thank you. I know, since we've known we needed to fill those roles, there have been lots of questions. What's the process? And so just thank you for taking on a thoughtful, inclusive process on top of everything else that you're doing.
Sure.
So really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing how that goes.
Thank you. The only other update I have is Ms. Fondon and Mr. Holbrook from WA sent information about the ghostwriter receiving some awards, which I think are fantastic. So they were recognized by the New England Scholastic Press Association, Special Achievement Awards during its localizing competition for student press that brings national issues to the local level. So Melanie Duronio received a recognition for Students Start fundraiser to help India become COVID safe. Srinithi Raj for coping with COVID-19, missing out on familiar relationships. Kristen Sue for remembering 9/11 sound bites. And Anushka Patel, James Farley, and Kristen Sue for Westford Remembers and makes a mark on its community. So congratulations to them. I think that's fantastic.
Okay. Let's go to school committee updates. Alicia?
So the policy subcommittee continues to chug along, going through some of the more recent policies coming out of MASC. But also more interestingly, I mentioned last time, we met with the Clean Energy and Sustainability Committee members. The idea is that we're going to look at our policies in general, but first we're going to be looking at sort of an overarching umbrella policy that is supportive of clean energy and sustainability throughout our district, sort of in line with what the town has undertaken as their clean and green energy charge for the next few years. So our plan now is to meet again, hopefully before February break, and this time loop in Paul Fox and any other members of the administration who want to come on board, and sort of look at that umbrella policy and then talk about the next steps for digging into individual policies and where, kind of flesh out where they might touch other subcommittees, where they might touch other departments within the district and things like that. So I will be sending out an email to Paul Fox and to the superintendent tomorrow to try and see if we can find an availability for us to have a meeting with the policy subcommittee and go from there.
Wow. Thank you. Your subcommittee has been so busy. And I just think it's amazing that you have you've said, we are going to modify every policy by the end of the year. I just think that's really bold of you to.
See, don't test me, because I might.
Alicia likes policies in nice, neat little rows.
All 100, how many, we have like 180, 240,
I don't know.
forget.
There's a lot.
You're going to modify everyone this year. That's just so ambitious. Thanks for that. Any other school committee updates? Yes?
In between our last meeting and this meeting, Capital Planning Committee voted to make their recommendation to the town manager, who then takes the list of capital projects and works them into the budget and different funding mechanisms. And everything that has come to us was passed back in November. If you remember, Paul walked us through them. There was a replacement truck with plow, a mail courier vehicle. The Miller School needed a replacement freezer and refrigerator. And the master plan feasibility study that we've been discussing was also on there. It was awesome.
That's great. And for anybody who's curious, there was a good presentation at that meeting. And I don't remember. Yeah, it was November, I think.
Yes.
And
right.
so look through the archives and you can find that presentation. It had pictures and everything, so that's a good way to get caught up on that.
And one last update, sort of capital adjacent, was, if anyone remembers, when he came back in November, Paul was leading this effort with the assistant town manager to kick off an energy service. I'm sorry, I always forget what the S stands for, but energy savings performance contract.
Yeah, it's a performance
company, which basically the town has allocated money at the last town meeting to sort of have this consultant who will walk through certain facilities in town and make a whole lot of sort of recommendations about like LED lighting or solar panels, or how to like kind of long-term capital investments that can pay for themselves if they're part of a plan. Like if you're a homeowner and you've ever done like the mass save where they walk through and sort of like replace your shower head and your your light. It's kind of like that on a much bigger scale, but the committee that reviewed was a really big time commitment. We reviewed like 9 committees. We interviewed the top like 3 or 4 companies.
Yeah.
And then we made a recommendation and the select board approved that contract. So we're moving forward with Amoresco.
That went really fast,
Yeah.
that whole process. I can't believe
If you
we've selected already.
If you weren't in it, it does seem that it went by fast.
Less so for you?
I assure you that it felt slow in the moment.
That's a lot to look at that many and select in
Yeah.
a matter of a few months,
Yeah,
a couple
there
months.
was a learning curve.
Feels like,
Yeah.
Did your due diligence?
Yes.
Or maybe it's just that special town meeting seems like it was yesterday and it was not. It was not just yesterday.
Right.
It was longer ago than I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, Captain.
Just an update on, again, the Robinson Playground. We had another meeting last week. This time now that we've selected the kind of the area that it's going in is now diving more into the layout of what that playground is going to look like, and the pieces of equipment we're hopefully going to have in it and budget. So we're hoping to do another meeting, I think it's next week, to again come back and kind of see where we're at. So we're moving along. We are hoping to, according to Paul Fox, we are on track in terms of timeline, and hopefully that it will be up and running by next school year. So, so far so good.
That's nice. Thank you. Keep us posted. Okay, if there's nothing else, we're going to go to student update in Megna.
So we just had a big discussion before all of this, which I felt like was really eye-opening, really good to get that dialogue started.
So people know, the school, a subset of the school committee meets with the student council on a regular basis, and this was, I think, our second one, or maybe our first one.
our first.
Yeah, our first one, that's right. The
Yeah.
first one didn't happen. Our first one of the year, so.
Yeah, I think it was very real too. You know, I wish they all talked that much at Thursday morning meetings.
I'm still trying to wake up at that point.
Yeah.
It's almost dead silence, but it's okay.
I guess that says a good thing about us.
I guess so. I guess so. So yeah, so I feel like things are very fluid in the school right now. There's a lot happening. I feel like there's a lot of changes happening, oddly enough. But I think it's important, especially during these times, to like recognize the little wins. Like for instance, the other day I was in my personal finance class, and it was just like an aha moment because we had all joined our desks and we were like doing some activity with these little beans. But I was just like, that is the first time I think in like 2 years I've done like a collab, like where we're physically like moving these like little beans. And so it was just nice to see that after so long. Like, we're doing partner work, but like this was something really new that we hadn't done in a long time. So I think it's important to think about those little wins. Sports seasons are in full swing. Games are happening every Friday and during the week. So swim team and basketball teams are, having their games. Mrs. Murphy and I are sort of looking at how our government is going to be going forward next year. Sort of following that law, and some other students have brought some proposals to the table. So we'll be running elections, so we're sort of looking at how this is all going to go and, what sort of new positions we're going to be having going forward. So that's exciting. We're getting the ball rolling on that. And then in general, we had a blood drive last week. It's really successful always. Especially at WA, they're hugely successful. So we had a blood drive, and there's just some fundraisers going on right now at school. But that's all I have for you right now.
That's plenty. Thank you. You were talking about sports, and it made me think that if people are curious about like WA sports, and you're like, I'd like to keep tabs on it or hear more, I will tell you that by following WestfordCAT, but on YouTube, by following WA and WA Athletics on Twitter. There was another one I was going to say, and I've already forgotten it. Oh, and the Ghostwriter.
Yeah,
I feel
the
like
Ghostwriter
too. The Ghostwriter
reports widely.
Like, I get notifications constantly about like, oh, this game is starting. Oh, here's the score at halftime, and I really love it because I do feel like
And it's nice because the Ghostwriter actually, like on Instagram, even if you can't make it to the game, they'll be posting like each quarter, this happened, this player did this. So it's just like
in the stories.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And so it's like nice to see.
So go do that. Go follow all of those. Thanks, Magna.
Yep.
Okay, we're on to business, and thus begins the Brian Work Show. With 2 agenda items.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye,
thanks.
Miss
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming out.
Good,
How
how
are
are
you?
you?
Thank you for having me. Great, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And let me find your presentations.
I shared them
Yep.
both with you. So.
And I'll pull them up. So this is Brian Rourke, and I'm going to, our curriculum coordinator for, I always, it's not health and wellness. Is it health and wellness?
PE Health and Wellness.
I was close.
There we
I
go.
left one out. Thank you. And we'll start with talking about the Panorama
Okay.
program
All right.
/ software.
Sure.
Yep. And I will pop that up for folks at home in a minute.
Before you get started, I do have to say that there's like a little, I think a little budding rivalry between Mr. Rourke and Dr. Cleary, because she has always had full command of like these incredible PowerPoint presentations, and she can find the best themes, and he's bringing something to the table. He has some great themes.
I am more than happy to take the back seat after tonight. All right? I'm good. I promise.
I no joke had the same thought though. I really am like, this is stunning.
All right. So thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate having the opportunity to really give you a bird's eye view of what we've done with this tool, and also give you some next step considerations as we look into the future with this. So like I said, I'll give you an overview of what we've done since we have partnered with Panorama as far as the different topics, the different surveys we've done. And you'll be able to see the amount of responses that we have received from everyone since beginning this, both the whole aggregate responses, but also from families, students, and staff as well. So here's the agenda for the evening. In December, I'll give you a brief rundown of why we really partnered with this company and this organization. We'll go through what we've done, like I said, things to look forward to, and then I'll give you an opportunity to ask questions, and I can answer any questions that you may have. So this really came out of I guess a recommendation from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education as we reopened into the 2020-21 school year. And as part of that process, they really tasked districts with taking a look at the social emotional learning once we came back into the buildings, whether it be full in or where we were in Pod A and Pod B. And that was one of the big focuses of it. And I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for Wendy Pakacek and the research and the information that she really looked into to bring Panorama into the district to be able to help support our staff, help support our students when we really made that transition into the half-day schedule that we had at the beginning of the year. So just again, the overview, the big reasons why we did this was, one, well-being and sense of belonging for both students and staff and faculty and so on. And then the other component of this is why we did it is the social emotional skills and the competencies that exist. And just to give you a little reminder of what those competencies look like or what they are, it's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And those come from an organization known as CASEL. So as we go through, this is the voices heard. So our total number of responses since really partnering with this organization is we have been able to hear the voices of 16,265, or excuse me, 16,265 responses, right? This includes families, students, faculty, staff, and so on. And just so we're on the same page, and just so you understand it, there are some surveys that take place where there are two surveys, but when they're presented to our staff or our students, they're really combined into one. So if you were to just quickly looking around, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, just looking around, if they had 8 people in front of you, so if you took one survey that was combined into one, it would actually account for 16 responses. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I just want to be transparent and clear with that information that's presented up there. Okay. So of those, that big number that we saw, I just forgot it, of the 16,265, this gives us a breakdown of who we've heard from across the district as far as families, staff, and students as well. So now we dive into the meat and the potatoes a little bit as far as what we see. So topics, what Panorama does is they group their questions as far as topics go. So they're related to a single subject area. So one of the big topics that we've all have heard a lot about since really coming in, but more so this year, is sense of belonging, right? So they group a set of questions around that topic, a sense of belonging. And then what that does is that will give us an overall, I'm gonna say score, but it will give us a percentage of the amount of responses which were favorable to that sense of belonging. So what that allows us to look at is, say there's a 70% favorable 70% who said that they belong, it will come out to us as 70% favorable. So that allows us to then look at different areas as far as our greatest opportunities, as far as any growth that we could make, or as far as any celebrations that we might be able to have as a result of the information and the data that we see. And that can then also inform district-wide initiatives, could also inform building-wide initiatives from school improvement plans, and also for planning moving forward, which I think from the school improvement plans that were presented, a lot of, if not all the building principals have started to work this into their school improvement plans to really to dive into it and look at it. So the next component of this really is to just give you a glance at what we have done since the fall of 2021 as far as the different topics go. So this is when we first came back into the buildings on August of 2020, and as you can see, the students, this is what we looked for. Panorama specifically set up a survey instrument, a survey tool for coming back in off of really going out in the spring of 2020. And these are some of the topics that they suggested that we look in. In doing my preparation for tonight, there's two things that I just wanted to bring forward to you. One, which I left off there completely on accident on the student side, was distance learning engagement. And the second one, which was left off on the staff side, was well-being, right? And that was just my mistake on doing that. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that as well. And what I want you to really take a look at as we go throughout these topics that are present, take a look at some of the things that you may notice time and time again. And I'll explain to you why I think that's important at the end. So for me, right now, what I can see up here on the staff side of things is belonging. And then the other one on the left side is obviously sense of belonging. You'll see that repeated kind of throughout as we go through, and I think it's important, and I'll explain to you why it's important at the end of it. So this goes into the winter of 2021, when we actually brought families on board with this. One of the first things that we had looked into when getting the Panorama platform and really partnering with them is we were under the impression that it came with families, students, and staff. Well, there was a mistake which ended up happening and take place. Needless to say, the mistake actually, it helped benefit us because we were able to reach out to our families and really get the input from our families as well. So that gave us an opportunity. The families component of it for this year's contract with them is not included in that. So that's why as we progress and as we go through, and you'll see the students and the staff is really the focus of what we've been doing over the years. The far one on the right for the staff side, I just want to point this one out for that teacher perception of student. This is more geared towards our K through 2 students. Our K through 2 students won't be able to answer some of these questions. So what these are is, or excuse me, what they are is they're from the teacher perception of the student. So a classroom teacher will, from what they see based off the students in class, will answer these set of questions for these students, and then that is what gives the indicators, the indication of how different schools are doing, how different students are doing as well to the building principal, so then they can dive into it and really try to see where some students might need some additional help, or where a group of students, or where a future focus area might be for them, right? So we'll see that one more time throughout this, and it would actually be for this year as we go through. And if at any point, I should have said this to you at the beginning, if at any point you just want to know what the topic is, let me know. I have them written down and I can read them to you. So last year we came into, and this really came out of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, which we began discussing and really talking about the planning for the May 4th Professional Development Day. What we decided to do is we decided to use this tool in addition to not just with our students, but with our staff, to really get a good feeling, a good understanding as where we stood as a district. And Panorama also gives you a diversity, equity, and inclusion component of that as well, which you can pick and choose different topics from their survey instruments. And that's through the work with the DEI committee. These are the topics that we really chose to take a look at for last year. So we looked at belonging, cultural awareness and action, which is adult focus, cultural awareness and action, which is student focus, educating all students, and then professional learning about equity. And just to give you, this will be a good one to give you an example. So the adult focus is how well a school supports staff and faculty in learning about discussing and confronting issues of race, ethnicity, and culture. So that's from the adult focus. The student focus is how well a school supports students in learning about discussing and confronting issues of race, ethnicity, and culture. right? So it allows staff to answer not only from themselves, but also from the perspective of the students as well. And then students also have an opportunity, there's a topic for this one specifically about students as well. So students can have that opportunity to answer these questions too.
And you might have said, how many questions might you see per topic?
Per topic, maybe 5 to 6,
Okay.
and you have the ability to wipe questions out if you don't think they belong, or wipe questions out if you don't think that they're relevant, or just something you don't want to ask. On average, Panorama suggests about 5 to 6 topics per survey, which can take anywhere from 15 to, I think the highest I've seen is 22 minutes to complete. So yeah, so there's different ways in which you can edit the survey to see what you want to get as far as gleaning different pieces of information.
And Brian, real quick, and how does like your average question look? Does it have like a somewhat agreed to, like a
Yeah,
fully
so
agreed
it has,
spectrum,
so it's on I think it's like it's on a scale. So it's a scale of 5 options which you can pick from. Just like you said, significantly agree, somewhat agree. And within those 5 questions, what it does is it takes the top 2, let's just say agree and somewhat agree, and then it will say that these are the percent favorables. So the top 2 answers which are selected, those are the ones that are favorable. The bottom 3 from the middle one down, those are not considered favorable answers. So that's how they really take that whole percent favorable to be able to report out from what we can see as a building as a district as well.
When you say 15 to 20 minutes, is that also for when the teacher fills it out per student? Like
So-
on behalf of their student? Okay.
So when the teacher fills it out for students, that's a great question. It's really again, it's 5 to 6 topics, and with that specific instrument, it's usually 1 question per topic. So that probably takes 2 minutes tops for a teacher to fill out for a student at the K through 2 level. Yep. And between the May 4th and the October 12th, this is a perfect example for what I talked about earlier. So the May 4th, you can see it's pretty much an identical slide with the adjustment of the dates and the topic of our professional development that day. So we are able to see growth that takes place. If we have the same topics every time, we're allowed to see potential growth that takes place throughout based off what we do as far as professional development. And a perfect example with this one is, as far as professional learning about equity goes, we did a professional learning about equity on May 4th. We turned around, did a full day PD day, and then we did another full day PD day on October 12th. So the professional learning about equity, this one increased because of the work that we've done in between them, the work that we have continued to do throughout the school year as far as building a better belonging goes. So the more topics that we keep in line and we keep similar from survey to survey, it allows us to see any potential growth as we go. And if we want to see different areas, then we simply just plug in different topics to get feedback on different areas. Panorama does suggest keeping some consistency as far as topics go, because that allows us to see our growth and so on. So this is just a good example of that, how that growth and how that works out.
Brian, can I ask, how many
Yes.
surveys per year then are you, like, is recommended to do? Is it once a year or twice a year, or every time you've
Usually
done the PD?
about 1 to 2 times a year. It could vary. I mean,
Yeah.
since if we have I'm not sure what the professional development daily schedule looks like for the rest of the year. I don't know if it
Don't
falls.
touch those.
I'm not touching it. I don't know if it falls into this, but if we decided as a district we wanted to see how we were doing in some of these areas, but like throw some new ones in, then we could certainly do it in that fashion. For students, they usually recommend 1, maybe 2 times a year, and they recommend sometimes at the beginning of the year looking at the social emotional learning competencies and seeing really how those can grow throughout. And then the other thing, which is, I think, kind of great about this, I'm a little bit of a geek with this stuff, but it's just nice to see growth from year to year to year. So you could see growth in the building as students move and progress throughout the years. So there's actually an opportunity to see that growth as they go throughout the grade levels.
And I do think, and certainly this meshes beautifully, I joke about that with our professional development, but this is truly an initiative for systemic change. So what we don't want to do is to survey too frequently and then expect any sort of turnaround in the matter of months. This is something, if it's done well, that's going to be measured over the course of years. And so perhaps 1 to 2 times a year is the right answer, but we don't want to survey too much, because the reality is, the way that we're approaching this, we want to get it really ingrained in the fabric of the district and of each school.
So you see kind of the survey results from one year potentially influencing the PD topics or whatever, maybe the following year, or
Exactly.
not further out.
Exactly,
Okay.
Catherine.
Real quick, Brent, and is there a push to make sure that the same cohort's being surveyed, you know, in one survey versus the next one?
The same cohort of students, or the
Well,
same
I mean,
cohort
just
of topics?
students, staff, I
Yeah.
mean, right, so, like, that you're not getting different swabs of staff
Okay.
each time that you survey, right?
So yeah, so every time that we survey, it's really whatever our data management system has, right? So for the staff, for our staff surveys, I pull from the data management system that exists with the staff. Those are the staff that get the surveys.
Okay.
For our students, I pull from the student information system for the students. Those are the students that get the surveys, assuming that we don't have the opt-outs that take place, right? So does that answer your question?
Yeah, so it's literally being sent to every student and every.
everybody.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yes.
staff member,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's helpful. Thank
everyone
you.
has the opportunity to do it. They can choose not to do it
Right.
if they choose, but yeah, so the cohorts change. And the other thing too, with this staff one, for the May 4th PD Day and October 12th PD Day, there are different surveys given to our instructional facing staff that we have, teachers, actually really just teachers, and then we have our non-instructional facing staff, which are assistant principals, school counselors, and so on. So there's different surveys based off of their different interactions with the students.
I had one last question on the PD, the 2 slides for the PD days. Is that like, you're giving the survey before the PD so that you can see what to focus on, or is it after the PD to see what sunk in?
So, wonderful question. So the first day we did this on May 4th, we actually sent it out at 7:45 in the morning, and we used it as really their attendance, right?
Okay.
And then we talked a little bit more, and once I came around for the October 12th PD Day, I had brought up the notion of saying, you know what, let's do this on the back end of the day so that we can get the full scope of from where we started in the morning on that May 4th day to the finish on the October 12th day. So we were able to see that full scope of what has taken place from the beginning of that day into not just the end of that day, but all the work that was kind of done in between. That's great. So this is current, this is this year. We actually just completed everything you see on the left. I closed the last group of surveys today. So everything you see on the left we have done so far. So with the 3 through 5 level, and I'm actually gonna back up, and what's kind of cool about this one is I was able to break it out by grade spans. So last year it was 3 through 5 and 6 through 12, and they all got the same topics, but with this year, I worked with the building principals and we worked together, and the 3 through 5 principals all have the same topics, so that gives them an opportunity to discuss amongst themselves, but also discuss amongst as a team to see from building to building to building what was great, what was some of the opportunities they had, and it also gives them an opportunity to be like, oh, what are you doing in your building? Because I noticed you really can't see building to building score, but what you can see is you can see how a building did in comparison to the district. Right, so that might offer the opportunity to have some questions and really to get some additional information. And then we did the same thing with the 6 through 8 level. So at the 6 through 8 level, the 2 buildings collaborated together, and these are the topics that were picked out at the 6 through 8 buildings as well. And for the 9 through 12, myself and Principal Antonelli are looking at an April survey administration window, and we're gonna start with taking a look at the 6 through 8 topics, which were done, and see if we can put some in or leave them or tweak it around based off what the needs might be at Westford Academy. So that was one way to really get the levels to focus on something that they were consistent across the building, and also to lead to further conversation and so on. And it was a little different, like I said, of how we did things last year. And then the same thing on the staff side. This is the teacher perception of student surveys. And some of the topics are the same, some are a little different. And this is where I can touch upon what is great about keeping the topics the same is, you can see that growth. So from last year, when we did the K through 2, we can see any growth that took place from last year with the K through 2 to this year, as long as the topics are the same.
Can I jump in on this slide for a
Sure.
second? What made you, sorry, maybe I just, a semantics thing for me, when it says fall, but I'm thinking January, like, was that the same sort of time frame you used last year? Or like, what makes you wait for mid-year? Does that make
It
sense?
just was the planning.
Okay.
Honestly, we started this conversation in October.
Okay.
I think the beginning of the year, just getting their
Sure.
feet underneath them, getting into it.
Yeah, I mean,
and-
I think it would almost make sense, right? Everybody's
Yep.
kind of, there's so much paper in the beginning of the year that I just was wondering if it was a conscious thing to move
Yeah.
it to sort of January.
And if we could have done it earlier, I would have, but it's just, I think we just had to figure out as the year came in, coming in, different changes and everything. But it's certainly adjustable.
Does this match the schedule for last year, or was it earlier last year?
Last year was earlier,
Okay.
because last year it was, I want to say like September, October window that we did it,
It was specifically designed to find out how did people feel about coming back to
coming
school.
back into the
I see.
buildings.
Right, and
yeah.
so we were using it for that data at that moment in time, which was
all
more
very-
geared towards the fall.
Very conscious,
Yeah.
like determined to,
Yeah.
this is the time to
Yep.
find out this. Got it. Thank you.
And so, and the thing that I think, that was great about this year that Brian did an excellent job with as well too, was it was that collaboration piece with the grade level principals. So we started the conversation, and then the more they talked about it, the more they wanted to explore the topics to then figure out, okay, well, what makes sense? Let's all be on the same page. And then it was, okay, well, when does it make sense to administer this? Even though it doesn't take a lot of time, you still need to have time in the schedule for it to happen. And I think then it was like, well, let's do it when it's not gonna be as disruptive. But they also are doing it, like the academy's gonna do it in April.
Mhm.
Like they kind of all spread it out to what made sense to their needs.
And that was one of the big things for me, is really, like you said, to figure out what makes the most sense for them as far as topics and as far as being able to run it. And it made sense for Westford Academy to look into April, where with 6 through 8 and 3 through 5, they were like, yeah, let's figure it out and we can get it moving, It adds that flexibility. And I think that 3 through 5 and 6 through 8, just the grade span, it also adds a little bit more as far as collaboration goes and being able to look across the buildings and different buildings and really get a feel of what each other is doing. And I also know that our principals work relatively closely, collaborate together quite a bit, and I'm sure they have some of the same conversations that come up from building to building.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what goes into prepping the survey on the front end, deploying it, and then on the back end,
Sure.
getting the results, and how much Panorama is doing and
Yep.
providing?
So I will tell you that, and I don't know if they're watching tonight, but Lauren Hickey and Julie Beaudry, they are our Panorama contacts. I feel like I email with them quite a bit about certain things and everything. So as far as prepping and getting it ready, the first thing that really goes into it is selecting the topics, selecting the set of questions that take place. Usually once I have a direction in which I can go with the topics, I will organize the survey in the Panorama platform. I'll then download it as a PDF and I'll send it out to the building principals and I'll say, here's what this looks like. Do you have any questions, any concerns, anything you want to get rid of, anything you want to adjust, or anything you want to change? I'll get the feedback from them, and then once I have that feedback, I will speak with our data management information system individual. I'll ask them for a set of rosters that we have, so I literally get all the information that we have for our students, and then that is what then drives these surveys to get produced and taken care of. So once everything's set up and done, I will submit the surveys for approval. I'll have the rosters uploaded, and then it's usually about a 10-day to 14-day turnaround for Panorama to then generate those surveys and to get them ready. While that's happening and taking place, we have that student opt-out process that goes in. We usually give about 2 weeks for parents either to come in and view the surveys, or in some instances we offered going over Google Meet in order to answer questions and have parents view the surveys in that fashion as well. So then once the surveys are ready, I'll get notified that everything's ready to go. There's a couple ways in which we can do it. At the elementary level, 3 through 5, they have their individual access codes. So students have to access the survey through their own unique access code, which is actually their student ID. So they know their student ID, and if they don't, the teacher can certainly help them out. We did the same thing at the 6 through 8 level. where we use their student ID number in order for them to access their survey. It's a link, it's a Westford link only. So the link is either written on the board or provided to them, and then they can go in and they type in their access code. Last year, we did it a little differently as far as emails. We did an email blast out to everyone because there's two ways you can do it. You can send an email out, or you can do the access codes. And the way I'm thinking right now at the high school level, I'm thinking, and I'll talk with Principal Antonelli about this, about what he prefers, but I'm thinking going the email route to send the emails out because it's just an easier way to get it into the hands of everybody. The great thing, I was actually surprised, and I think I texted both of you one day when I closed the surveys. I was thinking there was going to be like a 10-day turnaround for the surveys. Once I close them, the reports are ready right away. So I'm able to inform, I can inform you all as global administrators, and then I'm able to inform the principals. So for example, I closed the 3 through 5 one today, and within 5 minutes of me closing it, I emailed the 3 through 5 principals, said, your surveys are ready, you can take a look at them, here's how you access them, here's a one-pager that you can go through, and it will help you kind of navigate the platform and so on.
So can you talk a little bit too about the advantage of Panorama over, say, you know, doing our own survey with SurveyMonkey? Like what are they, what's the value that they're adding? It sounds like one off the bat is just the clustering of topics and questions that are just, it's like a library of questions, right?
So the great thing about Panorama, even from the early research of looking into it and trying to learn a little bit about it, but they're all research-backed. Like, they're all research-backed surveys. And once we get into the next slide, I'll be able to show you a little bit more as to like why I think maybe next steps in future planning, but they're all research-backed surveys. We have access to the data. It's our data. We can log into the platform. We can see, like I said, the percent favorable for certain topics. SurveyMonkey, we can't do that. And then the other thing which we're also able to do is we're also able to see how students responded to a group of questions, right? So how students individually respond is confidential. How they respond individually to questions is confidential. However, based off, like, let's just take sense of belonging, we can see how students have responded to the questions in the sense of belonging topic. So if we notice that a student indicated a sense of belonging and that score, specifically that group of topics, is lower, that really opens up a door for us and gives us an opportunity to have these conversations with these students and really to try to either support them, figure out what's going on, or really try to build that sense of belonging or build that relationship in order to help our students throughout. So it's not just one, like we can drill down and see individual students with topics, but we can also see a larger group of students as well within the buildings. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, that's great.
And I also think the playbook is another
Correct.
benefit. For every topic or module that we assess, there's corresponding activities that help foster that particular area. And it seems like those are endless. There was one professional development day where we, I think it was just the administrators maybe were diving into those, and you could just get lost, and you're like, oh, that's a really cool idea. So it can be used with staff, it can be used with students, and that's very helpful.
So can a teacher kind of access their class, say in a 3 to 5, like a 4th grade teacher can access their classes kind of results and use that to then go into the playbook?
So, yes. Right now, no.
Okay.
And it's honestly, it comes down to our management information system right now.
That's the next slide, right?
Yeah, so our management information system doesn't allow us to yet do that.
Okay.
But once we move to Power School, like it's gonna give us the ability to do more.
They speak to each other.
Yeah,
Power
they
School and
can,
Panorama
yep.
will speak to each other.
Awesome.
But right now, while it might be possible for an elementary school because
Correct.
Yeah.
Brian was able to upload rosters, right? Once you get into 6 through 12 where students have multiple teachers, it's not possible to connect them to their teachers. But with Power School, the teachers would be able to look at their student lists to get a sense as to how and again, they don't see the student responses, so no one sees the actual student answers to the questions, but they'll see the percentages as how they're doing in the topic areas.
And to go back to Dr. Cleary, what you had just mentioned about the playbook, a overall report might indicate that one school has this is your greatest opportunity in order for growth. So what they'll do is they'll link the playbook to that topic of greatest opportunity. So you can literally go into the playbook, grab, they call them moves, grab moves out of that playbook, which will focus on, let's just call it grit. If grit was one that was kind of low, you can focus on grit in your classroom.
Wow, that's great.
One of the things that helped last year was the fact that when we did this initial survey to find out how students were feeling coming back to school, we were able to share the building information with the administrators and then the counselors in the building as well too. The teachers didn't see all of it, but the counselors had access to it so they could look at their caseload, and if there was somebody that jumped out, sometimes there are things that they already knew about, right? So this is just data that was supporting them, but then if there was something new, then they had an opportunity to say, okay, wait a second, I want to check in on this, which I think was really helpful last year. And so moving forward with Power School, we'll be able to kind of expand that to more people, so that doesn't fall on the shoulders of the counselors as well. I mean, they're the experts in that area, but this way more people will have an idea as to how students are doing.
All right, so just some next steps, considerations. Some of the stuff I pulled from talking with Julie and Lauren over at Panorama, but I would say the next steps for us are, as far as buildings go and as far as the district goes, really identify areas to celebrate, things that we know that we are doing a great job with, and that can come from Panorama. So if we see that we've made growth in certain areas, if we say that this is one of the best things that we are doing as far as topics in the buildings, those are things that we should be celebrating, right? And then I would also suggest that these are things that we should be celebrating with staff, celebrating across the district, things that we really are proud of the growth that we have made. And the other thing is, I talked earlier about opportunities for growth, right? Identify those areas where we could potentially have some growth to take place. And one of the things that Panorama really has suggested is take the lowest score that you have, and that's your opportunity for growth right there. Just take a look and see what you struggled with either as a district or as a building, and that's what should be your focus. Yes, keep everything else at the top and try to do that, but change your focus as far as focusing on that area for growth. This is the great stuff which I see in our future with Power School and Panorama. We have that increased ability to support individual needs of students, and like Dr. Chu had mentioned at the K through 2 level, because of just the structure of it and having those classroom teachers were able to answer those questions. But the other thing I would also say at the K through 2 level is with Power School is we have the integrated arts, we have art, we have music, we have PE, we have health. With Power School, now we can bring not just the classroom teacher in, but we can bring all of those integrated arts teachers in as well, and they're able to see those 21, 22 students at the elementary level of kids that come into the classrooms and how they are doing and how they have responded as well. And also that goes for the high school. So we have 7 classes at the high school, so there's 7 teachers on a given time, so we can have those 7 teachers, pair those 7 teachers up, and they can see the 25 to 30 students that come into their classrooms, into their sections, and they can see how those individual students responded to a certain set of subtopics, not just the questions, but really the topics. So that will allow us to be able to support more on really, I'm going to say, more on a spotlight on the individual students that come into our class, so we're able to support those as well. And then with that comes professional development for navigating the Panorama dashboard. Once we have that Power School and Panorama collaboration in together, I certainly think we should offer opportunities for staff, and it comes with we get 2 free professional developments a year through Panorama. So they will facilitate a professional development opportunity. I can reach out to them and say, we're looking for this date, this is what we're looking for, and I can tweak it based off feedback I get from building principals, based off feedback I get from Dr. Cleary, Dr. Chu, as far as what is going to be the best for us in order to get the most amount of our time out of that.
Is that like an online kind of PD or?
Yeah, it's an online, yep. So they'll facilitate it. They come on through Zoom and they facilitate it. And when we did it here last year, they actually broke us out into different grade spans. So we were able to get a little bit more narrowed in on what we were looking at. So then with that comes roster integration, which again is that ability to integrate Panorama and Power School with the rosters. That also, I think I would like to explore this potentially a little bit more, but that also gives us the opportunity. So if you have a group of students in front of you in a class, there is a way, I'm not sure of this, but there is a way for that teacher to put together a 2 to 3 brief question survey about the class or something that they did, and to get like immediate feedback from the class in that fashion. That's a little bit more complex and layered, but certainly something to think about.
So, quick question about the rosters. You said they're available for they will be available for like individual classes. Would they also be available for things like sports teams or like the theater department or the chorus? Can they be broken out to extracurriculars as well?
That would have
I'm
to be identified in Power School.
That,
Through Power School?
So if it was identified in Power School, you could probably do it,
Yeah.
and so, and most of our extracurriculars are not, but some are, right? So
Okay.
some are classes that then are connected with an extracurricular as well, but
It-
that's a good question.
in my mind, I can see how it can work.
Okay.
It might be a little bit of more legwork to get it done. I'm not gonna say it's not impossible,
Okay.
but I think in how I have done this to this point forward of just downloading the rosters
Right, right.
and just doing it that way, but I'm not gonna say it's not possible. I certainly do think it could be done.
Excellent.
All right, so this one, long-term plan. I learned about this last week, and I got a little giddy and excited about it because I think it can certainly help us, and I'll just give you the overview, and I'll explain what some of those are out there. Carrie might be able to help me out a little bit more with some of those, but so Panorama Success, what this is it's and I'm reading from what I have from them. It's a dynamic platform that gives educators immediate access to the data that is most important for them to support students. So what it can do is it gives a complete picture of each student's academics, attendance, behavior, and social emotional learning progress in school every day. So between Panorama and Power School, we can really merge these together in order to really get the whole picture of our students. Allows educators to create, update, progress monitoring interventions to ensure students are growing. Serves as an early warning system and multi-tiered system of supports and intervention tracker for districts as well. So it helps districts measure social and emotional learning through research-backed surveys and displays that data alongside other indicators to give a full picture of the whole child. And in some instances, what it can also help us do is it could help us identify at-risk students. It could help us identify students who are either on track for certain things. I asked them to put together like a 3 to 5 year plan of what this could look like, so I know that this is further down the road, but the other thing that it can also do is it can take so it will mesh with Power School like we said, but it can take iReady, Lexia, WIDA, Dibbles, and MCAS and really make a complete picture of that student and really be able to start to see the student growth all the way from kindergarten or younger up through the grades, and will allow us to really see the whole picture of the student's education. It's, like I said, 3 to 5 years out, but it's just a thought process. And like I said, I got a little giddy when I heard about it the other day.
But it in itself is bringing academic and social emotional,
Bringing it all together.
bringing it together and
Yep.
be in one spot where you
Yep.
could see, okay, this person might really be doing just fine academically, but not so fine
Correct.
social emotionally,
Yep.
and or the reverse, or, you know. Yeah.
That's cool.
So, questions?
Can I ask, are there different packages, so in terms of like funding this, you know, and hopefully moving forward, by the sounds of it, it's something that we should be using on a daily, annual basis. It's not something that, initially as you were doing it, I was thinking, oh, maybe as surveys like every other year, but as you're talking about their longer term plans and you can see it's connecting, are there more costs involved for us to like have a full package of Panorama? Are there different contract levels, pricing
Yes.
levels?
Yep.
Okay.
So, I don't know the student success one. I'm not sure what that one is. The roster integration, which allows the two to talk more than what we're doing now. It's enrollment based, so it's based off our enrollment. I would say that one is a little bit more palatable than I would say the student success one. That's just my interpretation from what I do know about it to this point.
Other questions?
I do, briefly. Brian, can you just reflect, like, what feedback have you gotten from the people who've actually taken this? Staff members, things like that.
Feedback from staff members.
Yeah. I mean, is it just, like, I guess my concern is like as a district, we do a lot of surveys, right? Like, is this another survey that's just getting added on to things, and is that a problem, or is that?
From my lens, I don't think we do many staff surveys. I think this might be the only platform that we use for doing staff surveys. Would that be accurate?
Well, I mean, we have our own. We do create our own.
Okay.
I'm gonna jump in I think, so far as staff's concerned, the staff hasn't seen the data, right? So when we first rolled it out, it was building based, and then, like I said, like in that first year, counselors saw some of the data as well too. Even the information that we used last year, that still stayed at the administrative level, looking to see, okay, what types of things should we be working on, because it hasn't, other than the teachers who were leading surveys about their students, so the K-2 teachers who were doing that observation tool basically about their students, teachers didn't see their student data, so they knew that the teachers took the survey. And I will say, like, as a building principal last year, it was incredibly helpful for me, because then I was able to see some of that data, and I knew there were some people that I wanted to kind of check in with, right? And we had that information, but it wasn't the same way that we've used even the challenge success information that we got a number of years ago. That became, we just shared that data out and we looked at it in a very similar way. That's the direction we're going with it. But I don't know if staff would feel like it has been beneficial to them in any way yet, because they haven't necessarily seen the data, with the exception of maybe people who were able to get some additional support if they didn't necessarily feel like they were connecting and belonging at the time.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's helpful.
Yeah.
And I do think that at the 3 through 5, the 6 through 8, the 9 through 12 level, I do think that grouping the surveys that way certainly opens up the door for that opportunity to be able to take place. Like, just thinking like maybe professional development day or so on as we go through the rest of the school year. I'm not touching the PD day, I know. But
It's all about this. This fits right in. You're safe.
Pertaining to that question, Magna, I don't know if you had any thoughts from the student perspective on the survey.
Yeah, actually I did. I think that like, at least at the beginning of the year, I will be honest, I think that a lot of people felt that we just kept getting a good amount of surveys. Well, like, objectively that might not be true when you look at the numbers.
Felt that.
It definitely, like, I felt like every advisory block we had some survey to fill out. I think students, there is the genuine fear that what you're saying is not, like, completely anonymous sometimes. When it says it's anonymous, like, I do hear that narrative a lot of times, but, like, oh, it's not actually anonymous. And then also, like, I think that building that relationship with your guidance counselor is important, because I do know some students, like, will enter their true feelings into these surveys, and then they'll have to get called down to guidance because some sort of guidance counselor wants to talk to them, and that invokes a lot of fear within the students to talk about that. So that's just the reality of what goes on. But I also think that this is important data for everyone to know.
Do you feel like it was explained to you when you were given the survey? Like, you've heard a pretty thorough presentation. Do you feel like there are things here that you didn't know that you would have liked to have known before taking it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of magnitude to this survey, and I think that when at least we need to be made clear how important this survey is compared to, like, some of the other surveys we get. So because a lot of times I think in homerooms they're just like, there's a survey, I posted it, but.
Yeah.
And again, WA hasn't done this.
Right.
Oh,
right?
okay. I
So you
apologize.
just this year, you participated in the ones that we did.
We
in
did
the
it.
in the
I
fall.
remember doing
Last year.
one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we did it last
Yeah,
year.
We did it last year.
Couple
Okay.
times
When
last
you first
So-
started back to school,
yeah.
but they haven't actually done this one in
Right.
April.
Right.
Yeah.
And to help along those lines, and you had said, like, the seriousness of it, one thing that is offered to us as well is they give us scripts, so we can literally I can pull scripts and I can adjust it to meet the needs of our buildings, and it's I don't want it's almost like MCAS, like Like, you
Yeah.
know, you have the scripts where you have an MCAS take place and happen, like, there's scripts in that fashion, not MCAS, like, but it almost makes it like it's an important survey in order for you to give
Yeah.
as much information as you feel comfortable doing.
Yeah, because that's interesting, because to us, I think, if I remember correctly, it was yet another survey, but if we're sort of conveyed that this one has a lot of significance in portraying numbers about how the general student body is doing, I think that would be important.
Good, thank you. Valerie?
I have a sort of a two-part question that I think is related, and this could be just sort of social media chatter, but I'm curious if you know sort of what the opt-out rate is, and obviously not to
Yeah,
put you on the
nope,
spot, but
I
like a ballpark.
Yeah.
And then to someone who's skeptical, do you have like sort of an example, tangible result of using how the data was used in an instance?
How the data was used that instance when the survey was taken?
Well, like, or how a principal is using it, or like how a counselor used it,
Yep.
something like that, to help to Magnet's point, like how to convey that
Sure.
importance of it with someone that might be skeptical.
Well, I think one of the biggest things was when we came back into the school year last year. The school councils utilized that information and that data really to check in with our kids and to have those conversations. It certainly opened the door for those conversations to have and to happen, and to be able to support our staff and be able to support our students as they come in. I think that's a real tangible piece of it that could take place and happen. And I do feel that is what happened in some instances and cases, where it just opened the door to have those conversations and check in on our students.
And it did help us in the aggregate too, because we could see whether there was a difference in the way that the remote students were answering versus the students who were participating in the hybrid coming into school, whether they felt like they were connected or not. And so I felt like schools, even with individuals, but even just collectively, it kind of gave people an understanding as to, okay, because we had two models going, you know, and it was helping us to see were people feeling connected with what we had going on as well too.
Yeah.
And we met with some skeptical families or parents who thought that they were going to opt out. We shared with them the questions, we answered their questions, and the group that I joined you in ended up, I think all of them ended up having their students participate after that conversation. So we're happy to meet with anybody who's uncertain.
I don't know if it's just because, I mean, it's on our ARPA list right now, right, to fund it, or whether it's just got a little bit more airtime, but I believe in the value of it, and I just think there are some people who, you know, get a little skeptical of like, oh, another survey, are we just checking a box? Like, what's happening with that data? So just giving you another
Yeah, and
chance to sell that.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe at some point, did you use it last year in like a faculty meeting or something, to be able to share some information which was gleaned from Stony Brook?
Yeah, I did. I used the staff information as a reminder, because again, it's not anonymous, but it wasn't connected to any individuals, right, in terms of the data that we shared, but kind of as a reminder to show them that here we are, we think that we're in this really close-knit community, but there was a handful of people who said they didn't feel like they were connected to anybody. So we really, as a faculty, we really need to look at, look at everybody around us and make sure we're reaching out to each other and taking care of each other. So I used it as anecdotal data in that regard. But since I did know if there were any individuals who didn't report favorably in feeling like they belonged, or that I think one of the things was like whether anybody cared specifically. I mean, it was really heavy like that. And so I opted not to have a personal conversation with that individual about that, as much as I took that information and said, you know what, I need to check in on that person more often. I need to make sure that when I'm going around the building, that I'm taking time to have a conversation and just see how things are going, without it making it like someone got called down.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
to Megna's point, that can happen as well too. So I just used it in that regard to just kind of take the temperature and make sure that I was remembering as a building leader to consistently check in on people as much as I could.
Sweet. Did you have a follow-up comment?
Yeah, just I remember, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I was in a meeting with like Mr. Antonelli and Mrs. Pikacek when she was still at WA for my freshman year, and I remember or maybe my sophomore year actually, but she had done some surveys, and the remote students, we were talking about like the struggle to get in touch with the remote students and get them to, fill out these resources. And then also the fact that a good amount of students said that they felt like they didn't have someone they could go to in the school.
That was from this information.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I remember opening up that conversation at that time, but that's why I think it's so, I have a great relationship with my guidance counselor, and I just think that that's why it's so important to find ways to get students to just start even interacting with their guidance counselors from freshman year. Like, so many students just meet their guidance counselor like junior year when it comes time to talk about. But like, I will go to my guidance counselor, just tell them about what's going on in, hey, this class is, I'm doing this class, it's going well. Those conversations are important because then that builds my trust with him when, if something's going on, then it's not going to be so scary to go talk to them. And he's always willing to sit down and talk to me. So I just think that's really important to start freshman year.
Great point. Do you have?
I'm just curious, Brian, to the actual company Panorama. I'm assuming they are kind of qualified in survey design, and by the sounds of it, they do help a lot in terms of designing a very thorough survey. Can they also help with some interpretation? Sometimes you can maybe get results, especially if a few different topics, that they're maybe more qualified to help maybe dive into a bit more.
Yep. So if I heard it right, are you talking more about interpretation of the data which we receive at the end of it? Yes. So as part of their, I'll call it professional education or professional development, if I say to them, we need a session, we just closed the survey, we need a session to be able to look through and have you guide us based off the information that we just looked at and just received, so that we are not jumping to conclusions. They refer to it as the ladder of inference. So you don't want to move too quickly up that ladder of inference. You almost want to take a step back, and in one of the resources which I had just sent out to the building principals it's a resource, it's a worksheet based off the topics that we did. What were you expecting to see? Based off the topics that we did, and then you would dive in, you'd be like, oh, this is what I saw, this is what I was expecting to see, and it almost takes you through questions like, well, why? Why did we see this within it? So to answer you, yes, if we wanted to bring them in for a professional development as far as looking at the survey and the information we received, 100%, they would do that.
So you think the quality of the surveys being designed and the interpretations of the data is solid?
Yep. I feel comfortable and confident with it, in the fact that, again, I can say to them, and I did this 2 months ago at the high school with Principal Antonelli. We had an extra professional development from last year, so Principal Antonelli wanted one, so I was like, yeah, let's do this. So I sat with the individual via Zoom, and I said, take this out, get rid of this, we want this in. So we were able to tailor it specifically to what Principal Antonelli and his staff felt like that they needed. So yes, we can tweak things and edit things how we want based off what we need.
And correct me if I'm wrong, they're pretty widely recognized as like having expertise, right? This is like they're the big player in educational.
Yep.
social
I think
survey.
they're in all 50 states, larger districts, smaller districts. I believe there's a neighboring district who also utilizes it as well.
Awesome.
If there aren't any more questions, I think we'd probably be good to move on to part 2
Brian Workshop.
of the Brian Workshop, which is talking about the new-ish civil rights complaint reporting process. Let me pull that up on the screen as well. And thank you for the Panorama update. That was
You're welcome.
we've been waiting for that, and I know how enthusiastic and passionate you are about it, and it's very cool. And I love, the thing I love is the belonging one, because it's like, how do you it feels so intangible, but it also feels so critical, and to be like, oh yeah, we have questions that will help with that. That's amazing.
Nice slides again.
I feel like the ladder of inference, don't move too quickly up that, it's like a life lesson.
Yeah, that's
Right.
cool.
Yes.
All right, civil rights complaint reporting process. So I'll give you a little background on this. Last year, as part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion, there was a reporting subcommittee that was part of it, and I jumped on the reporting subcommittee, and through that work which we have done, we created a mechanism in which civil rights complaints can be filed or sent within all of the buildings across the district. So as we go through this, the form itself is actually modeled after, or it's adapted from the Department of Health and Human Services Civil Rights and Conscience and Religious Freedom Discrimination Complaint Form. So it is a form which is, I'm just going to say it's 100% legitimate, and the Google form that we now have in place is modeled and adapted off of that and those questions that are in it. So as far as the process goes, there's a QR code generated. There is a template QR code which exists, but every building will have their own building-based, building-unique QR code in which will be posted around the buildings in different locations, in which students, staff are able to go up to it, take their phone, utilize the QR code on their phone, and it will take them right to the Google form. As mentioned, the form itself is based off of the OCR Civil Rights Complaint Form. And what is kind of unique about this, I think, and kind of cool all at the same time, is that once the complaint is filled out or filed, as soon as the individual hits submit that's filling it out, the principal or the designated individuals by the principal get notified via an email. So it will say that there is a complaint form which has been filled out. It will give you a link in which you can click on. It will take you right to the form, and then all of the information is there that the person has sent in, that the building principal or their designee can start to begin to dive into it and do a background investigation as far as what is taking place and what is happening, and really what the essence is of the complaint. So we had talked, this was adjusted since last week a little bit, but not before it went into the packet, just to make sure that they're clear on that. So at the K through 5 buildings, the QR code is available in the main office. There's also a hard copy available in there as well. And then the other component of this is there's a hard copy available where an individual can go to get translation. So the translation is, at least where to go get it. The translation exists in English, Arabic, Chinese Simplified, Chinese Traditional, Gujarati, Korean, Portuguese, Brazilian, Spanish, and Turkish. So it looks just like this, and it's just sitting in the front office, so it's available and it's there. In talking a little bit with Principal Hislop today, and also talking with Dr. Cleary today via email, Google does a great job of translating some things, but it always doesn't do an awesome job at translating all things. So what I think we're going to do is we're going to go and get these professionally translated, something along these lines, to make sure that it is correct and that it's done appropriately, so that it is something that's available for our community as a whole.
Brian?
Yes.
And those were identified by our ELL staff as languages spoken within our district.
Correct.
So
Yep.
those are the important ones
Yep.
to have front and center.
Yep. Working with, I think it was Amy Bailey who helped with this in that. So yeah, so we're going to move forward, get some of these professionally translated so that we can have them specifically. in the
OCR might
buildings.
already have them translated in
That's a great
languages
point.
too, because, and you literally took OCR's
Yeah.
form and then digitized it. So that should be something
take
to
a
look
look at
at,
that.
because they might already have
Have
them
it done.
translated that we could then use those.
So yeah, K through, oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Nope, that's fine. The one adjustment we made after meeting 2 weeks ago or last week as a DEI committee is we talked about restrooms. At the K through 5 buildings, putting them in staff restrooms. And then at the 6 through 12 buildings, I just put restrooms, but that will cover staff restrooms and student restrooms as well. So you should see, in the next coming days, you should see these QR codes across the building that will be live and active in order for you to, if you choose, submit a complaint on there.
I think that's such a good idea. Just because also you might not want to do it out in the open,
Correct.
scanning that code. So
That was
I
sort of
think
the
it's
That was
idea,
the,
like,
that was the
great
reason, really.
idea.
Yep.
So then that brings me to the hard copy. Where in the main office will it be? Because a similar situation could be unfolding with a student that does not have access to a
Yep.
cell phone, but might not necessarily want everyone to see them going and getting a form. So where are you planning in main offices to have them?
So I can't speak to every building, but I'll speak to Westford Academy today. I know that in Westford Academy, if you walk in the main office on the right, there's a wall with these, I'm just going to call them plastic paper holders. But they have documents in there they have maps, they have quarter request forms, they have working papers and so on. So that one specifically for the high school, Westford Academy, is in there.
Okay.
And I guess I would encourage the building principals to work with their administrative assistants in order to pick out the best spot for that to take place.
Would it be possible to add the QR code to like each individual school website? I'm just wondering for parents. at
Some of
home.
them, I know for a fact that some of them have already started to do that.
Oh, awesome.
Yep, I know that's definitely in the works. And in some cases, the QR code's on there and the link to the Google form is on there.
The important piece is that all the QR codes are unique links for that building
Correct.
Yeah.
form.
Yep.
So that's kind of, everybody's making sure that
Yeah.
they have the right thing when they put it on the website, so.
And then the other thing which is important too is there's the settings on Google Form to make sure that you get notified that that is coming to you and whoever else you want to designate it to.
Wait, you
So-
said it's a Google form?
Yes.
Is there the option to edit your response after you submit it? Just something to think about.
I think it could be set that way
It
in the.
certainly
Yeah.
could be. Here's how I said it though.
Okay.
It certainly could be set that way. The only thing is, if someone was to submit it, what happens is you get a message back saying your complaint has been received. Someone within your building community will reach out to you in the X amount of days. Once it's submitted, you get your responses sent to you, so you have a record of your responses that were out there, so that so it's there. I don't know how that would shift or change.
True.
I'd have to look at that.
And it's also not it's the beginning of the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if someone had either more information or then
Right.
they did want to change information, when someone was talking to them, they'd be able to do
Yep.
that.
Right.
But I think that's a good point, because you're right, it does email your actual responses. So even if it did allow you to go in and edit it, it would send a whole other,
I see.
it would
I see,
trigger it
okay.
one more time to go through that whole process.
But it just is the initial signal.
Yeah.
And
That's
then it's that human conversation.
Right.
It takes
that would
place.
Backfill
Yeah.
any information.
There's one more thing I was gonna say, I forget what it was, it'll come back to me. So, if you wanna try, by all means, go ahead. So this QR code is live and active, okay? So if you wanted to take a minute, the thing that I will tell you is the form is shut down. So I stopped responses on the form, okay? So it just gives you a little bit of a glimpse as far as to what it will take.
No, I started the responses on the form on Friday. You had shut it down?
Yeah,
It's-
yes,
Shut it
because
down
I
again,
think,
because I started it because
Yes.
the principals were having a hard time
And I was-
creating their own.
at the time you were doing it, I was on it too, and I was like,
That's
oh,
why we did that.
yeah,
Okay.
yep,
So this is now no longer accepting responses?
correct, yep.
Right, because that's the Westford.
Right.
That's the
schools
the
all have their
template
own
one.
individual
Yeah.
ones.
Okay.
Yep, so that's the template one, so everyone has made their own copies and put their building names on it. So again, there's two avenues, there's a QR code, building-specific link, and there'll be a hard copy available in the office where translation can happen, and the building principals are putting it on their website as well.
This is the sign.
This is a little bit of a different version, I would say color-wise. The ones going around the buildings are, I'll say fuchsia, kind of, a little maroon and fuchsia, but this is what it will look like. This is what will be around the buildings. And through discussing with leadership, we kind of felt like that there needed to be a little disclaimer at the bottom as far as the reason that you might look into this and do this, and this is what we came up with.
I'm really glad to say that that's the piece for me that, like, this is all very procedural, but it's sort of that human piece of how does a person know, like, what does it mean to feel like you may have a case, understand. So I think the more we can do in general,
Yep.
both on the form, but just as in I don't know, professional development, but just everyday life of teaching people what this means
Like,
and how to go about it and how to think about it.
civil rights can feel sort of like opaque, right?
Right.
And so breaking it down in that way is like, oh,
Helpful.
okay.
It's helpful.
You're right. How does this relate to me?
And then,
Is there anywhere that talks about what it kicks off? So we would know once I
Yep.
submit this.
That's-
Signing myself up?
In the form, it does.
it
Okay.
does.
In the form, it gets more specific.
Great, yep.
You know what? Let me just do this. And then the other thing that we tweaked a little bit too in talking with Dr. Cleary and Dr. Chu is, in case it needs to get, can you mind speaking to that one a little bit?
Yeah,
In case it needs to get kicked to a.
Yes, so Title IX is sexual harassment, and that's an entirely different process. in a very, very elaborate process. It was revised in August of 2020. And if in any complaint here, if the harassment is based on, or indicated that it's based on sex, the person receiving that, the principal, automatically brings me in, and then I'll screen it in to see if it needs to go the Title IX route or not.
So that's one of the things that we tweaked on the form, was that we wanted people to know that, so that when they're checking off the area next to sex, there's a parentheses that will say, based on this information, you might be contacted by another person, because at the end, it's gonna tell them that the building administration is gonna reach out to you. Well, it could be Dr. Cleary, right? And so we want people to kind of know that it could be, it could actually be somebody else who reaches out to you to learn more about this.
And that's acceptable by Title IX, that this is sort of a funnel of complaints that would then get funneled to Title IX. That's okay, we're compliant to do that, because it is nice
Yeah.
to do it that way, because Title IX, and it is an elaborate process. It's nice that this is a nice, simple starting place that people can go.
That's right.
And then.
Because
figure
we
out
don't
what-
expect, at first, we were like, wait a second, do we have to have two separate different reporting
Right.
forms? And then like,
Right.
expecting just the regular person to know which one
Exactly.
is overwhelming. So that's why we're like, nope, because Title IX falls under civil rights, but it is more specific, and so that's what we looked at.
Looking at Brian's form there, it kind of looks like there's a question there of time of occurrence. So it kind of gives you an opportunity to do a pretty accurate record, you know, as opposed to, oh, I haven't been able to talk to somebody all week, or, you know, in terms of when your memory is fresh or your experience of it.
Yes. Should I go to the next?
Yep.
Next one?
Sure. And this is what the owner of the form will see once a complaint has been sent or a complaint has been filed, so to speak. And if, for example, if a principal chooses to put the assistant principal on the form and make them as the collaborator, not only will the principal get notified via this route, but the assistant principal will get notified, as well as anyone else that is put on the Google form. So there's really one, potentially two, potentially four eyes on it for once a form submission comes through.
And the person gets something similar
Yeah.
that says.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
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 And then basically the next step is a conversation happens.
Correct. The next step would be a conversation. An administrative member of the school community will reach out to the person. And the other thing too is the email. It has to be a valid email. So the person submitting the form, the email has to be valid. I don't know how Google figures out if it's valid or not, but it just figures out that it has to be a valid email. So hopefully it takes away from the someone submitting it for the wrong case or the wrong instance, or not taking it seriously.
Yeah, I think there's a setting you can do that will say it can only be from Westford K-12, which would take care of that.
So we set it. I don't think it's set for that. I think
No, it's not,
set.
because we do want
Parents-
parents to be able to
parents.
use
Want
it.
parents to be
But
able to do
that's,
it too.
you're right,
Oh.
Magda,
Yeah.
that'll do it for us internally, but it's set just to know, it'll know whether it does some type of algorithm, you know.
Yeah.
So you can't
And
say
then
no
the-
email at noemail.com.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is, on that civil rights complaint form and the one from OCR, you can submit a complaint on behalf of someone else.
Yeah.
So that's an option in there as
Yeah.
well. So it asks you to check off, are you submitting this for yourself or are you submitting this for somebody else?
We talked about that with the language on the sign too, because we're trying to keep it simple, and people ask, well, is it clear that you can be reporting for you or someone else? And so that's why the language says, if you believe discrimination has occurred within our school community, it kind of allows, I mean, people hopefully will know that it doesn't have to be towards them. It could be something that they've witnessed. Yeah.
Brian, what do you have planned for, like, I know that, it sounds like the QR codes are gonna start popping up, but what do you have planned for communication? Like student-focused communication all out?
So the principals are doing that.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
So I talked with the principals about it, and I said, because each one has because they all have a unique link to their school, I wanted them to communicate it this week to whether they're gonna put it in their Friday emails because they put it up this week, or whether it goes out separately But I've asked them to communicate it to their families and to communicate, and I think in age-appropriate ways to the students that they have.
But don't you guys, haven't we had this conversation, do the students get the Friday principal email?
But I can talk to Mr. Antonelli. I'm sure we can have it publicized through announcements or something like that.
Right, but that's why, I said that they're also gonna communicate it to their students in an
okay.
age-appropriate, like, I think the middle school message might be different than than
Right.
the
Yeah.
academy, just like the 3 to 5 principals might share it, but the K to 2 aren't necessarily gonna share it, or even 3 to 5 with their students in the same way.
Right.
Yeah.
And one thing, Valerie, I don't know if this will help, but one thing that is in the shared drive that we have created is, it was the overview of why this is in place and really the backstory about why it's in place. So principals have access to that so they can utilize some of the language what was in there. I forget what it was. What did we call it at the end of the year? What was
I wonder if like the ghostwriter.
it was like the debrief
Yeah.
or the progress we made at the end of last year regarding this reporting process. So that language is in the shared Google Drive
Okay.
for principals to be able to pull from.
And I have to say, I'm thrilled. This has been years in the, I know how much work you've put in on this over the years. And this was one of the primary, when we asked students and staff, the DEI, when we asked students and staff what they wanted us to focus on, this was one of the top requests. And to finally see it here, I'm thrilled. Thank you so much for all of your hard work. This is phenomenal. This is absolutely phenomenal. And I'm so glad that we can finally provide this.
Amen. All right, any other questions? We let them go? Do you have anything else?
I don't know.
Just hang
actually.
with us for the night.
I thought that's what you were gonna ask. You're like, so what's gonna be your third act?
I was thinking like, yeah, what's the next presentation?
Brian brings all the warm fuzzy
Thank you
feelings
so
and
much
stuff,
for
so-
Thank you.
sticking with us.
Appreciate the opportunity.
And, yeah, and all the good work.
Yep. Any questions come up afterwards, don't hesitate to reach out. All right.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank
Great
you.
job,
Thank
Brian.
you so
Appreciate
much.
it.
Thanks, Brian. And Magna, at our next meeting, you can tell us how you found out about it.
Yes.
How you saw it from a student
Yeah.
perspective.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Where it popped up, yeah.
Definitely.
All right.
All right.
That means we're moving on to our FY23 budget discussion.
Just 35 minutes behind.
It's all good.
You want me to go ahead and pull up the
Yeah.
presentation?
That'd be
Okay.
great. So
Oh, thanks, man.
what I did is I created updated slides into the original presentation, trying to keep it all together in one place. And at the same time, Pat took the lead and really drafted a wonderful memo that's also in the packet. One of the things that I think Pat and I kind of discovered was that in some of the previous budget discussions, things happened at different times with the committee, and so it was kind of hard to pinpoint numbers and dates together. So that's sort of the purpose of this. That's why I kept the entire original presentation intact, and then added some new information. And I'll speak to that specifically. But the memo that's in the packet that you received is also just an outline. Actually has the request there clearly, and then it outlines everything in the memo as well. So that's our intent there.
That's really helpful.
So if you look, so you look right away, the first 7 slides are different, and then the rest of the slides are the same. But so we updated it. I thought about, if I could have made the people in the pictures look a little bit older, then, that would have been, but I didn't want to do that.
Put like some facial hair on the
Right.
boys, you know?
Yeah. But so if you go to the next slide, so that you'll see that I just have the updated information. There is a new timeline, a new budget overview, and then just what the additional adjustments that we'll talk about tonight are. But then the rest of the information that was presented earlier is still intact. So the numbers are changing a little bit, but I'll speak to that when we get there. So if you go to the next one again, the new timeline, so tonight's the 31st, so we have our new budget updated presentation. At one time, we had actually talked about this as a tentative vote, so we're not there. A reminder that the town manager's presentation is on February 8th, and so this information, there is still some flexibility that I'll speak to, will no longer be flexible, because we'll have that finalized information. We should have it just before the 8th, but it'll be public on the 8th. Go ahead. And so then our next conversation is the 14th, so that's where now we're imagining more deliberation, more questions, more conversation for you about all of this on the 14th. Then with the tentative vote on the 28th. We talked about this in the subcommittee, the finance subcommittee the other day too. So this is something that we collaborated together with them. So just so everybody's aware of that. On March 10th is still the date for the joint meeting with the school committee, finance committee, and select board of the town. And then we had talked about March 14th being the actual budget hearing, the public hearing for the school committee's budget. So if we vote on the 28th, or you vote on the 28th, then to have that, the language is such that it's supposed to be at least 2 weeks before the town meeting vote. So we got plenty of time there. But we also, it does have to be advertised in the papers and things like that. So it is something that you'll need to decide if that's when you want to do that, so that we can make sure that we are appropriately communicating that to the public.
And our policy does say after we vote, then
Right.
we do the public hearing.
Yep.
Quick question
yeah.
on the timeline. The Feb 8 town manager budget presentation to select board, is that going to be a posted meeting for us, or are we just observing the meeting as we?
I think so.
Okay.
That's just their meeting, and then
Okay.
we put that on the timeline just
Okay.
because that's, so people will know that that's when the whole town budget is being presented.
I know generally members do observe that because it's important information for us to have, but I
Right.
didn't know if it was going to be a posted meeting for us. Okay.
Can I just ask newbie question, and I'm sure there's people watching wondering as well the same, why the vote happens before the public budget hearing?
That's an
We
excellent
were going to
question.
ask you that, because
Give me a second, I'll just go.
I'll tell you the answer.
These
It's
are
in-
rare forms.
Right now, it's because it's in the policy is the
Right.
reason right now that we're going to give.
See that lob from the finance committee to the
Yep.
policy
Alicia?
subcommittee?
My understanding is it's statutory. It's based on
Yeah.
Massachusetts
It's-
I
general
think
law.
it-
That's
It's
how
a
you do that.
it's a legal formality, really.
is,
Like,
yeah.
in the idea, just from a practical standpoint, the fact that we would have our public hearing that late in the game, like, it's just not, it's not feasible, right? So we're going to get feedback from the public as we're doing this whole process. So really, I mean, it's a formality at that point that we're statutorily required to do under the Mass General laws. That's my
But
understanding.
after you've had a vote.
Yeah, and I think also it's just to keep it clean, because we deliberate the budget over so many meetings, it's like, well,
Yeah.
which one is the public hearing?
Right.
So let's just make it clean and say, this is the official one after we've done all of that. Now, certainly, until town meeting, the budget is not the budget, right?
Right.
And so.
Right.
It's
in-
before the town votes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
because-
before the
Yep.
the taxpayers in town are able to vote. They have this opportunity for a public hearing to ask, questions, address their, concerns, so that then but it is strange that it's after the school committee has voted, but it allows for that,
It does say,
input.
Following approval of a proposed budget.
Yep.
Ah.
So,
I feel like public hearing has always sort of been a misnomer. I wish it had a different name. It's sort
Yeah.
of like the final presentation of the thing we are bringing to town meeting.
Gotcha.
But we've had all these,
Yeah.
public input sessions
I'm
up to that
guessing at some
point.
point it looked different, right? That it
Probably.
really was more of the
Probably.
deliberations, and we probably didn't do deliberations over a span of months and months like we do now.
Probably.
And interestingly, I did not anticipate there'd be this much conversation about the budget timeline. So June 11th is the town meeting. That's the new town meeting, and so that's the last piece of that. So now we have our new budget overview. So if you can go to that slide, I want to try to talk you through this. So if you remember the original slide, which is still later on in this packet, we have the FY22, we have the budget request in FY22, the town allocation, which was 1.63% over the previous year's town allocation, and there was the difference of $751,511. Then I presented the FY23, the initial FY23 budget, and at the very bottom, there was a difference of $705,000. So what I wanted to show here is that the process that's been taking place over the last couple of weeks, in meetings that we've had with the town manager and the director of finance, in looking at different information that they've had after the governor's budget came out and state aid was established and state assessments were established, what they've been able to identify is an additional $480,088 adding to our initial request. So what we did is, what I'm going to show you on the next slide is the adjustments that we're proposing which will decrease our request by $225,898. So you'll see that I'm subtracting from there, adding to the town allocation. Both numbers equal $63,961,692, which means that with this proposal, it is a balanced budget. So there's zero difference. Does that make sense to everybody? As to how I put that there? Okay. Yes.
And just to be clear, the percentages in that right column are also updated.
Those are also updated. So the original percentage for our original request was 1.9% over the FY22 budget request. And the original town allocation that we had talked about that the town manager had anticipated being able to provide us in the fall that Pat and I were working with was 2%. So they've increased to 2.77%, and we've decreased our request by 1.55%. Thank you for asking that question. Is that clear? Awesome. So if you go to the next piece, actually, could you go back to the other slide for a second? So I mentioned this earlier about February 8th. I'm presenting to you, this would balance the budget. There is still some potential flexibility that the town manager is still working on that might increase their town allocation a little bit more and decrease the amount that we need to subtract.
Okay.
I do not anticipate it being all of that, and then we can talk about the next slide. But there is potentially some difference that they're looking at and talking about.
And Chris, just
Yeah.
to be very clear, that these new adjustments are in addition to the adjustments that you have already seen. So these do not replace them. The assumption is they're already baked into the original proposal, and these are more to close the gap.
So the first adjustment that we have is I'm proposing that we reduce central office administration by 2 positions and absorb them into one new director of curriculum. It would be a savings of $89,900 if we were to do that. By reducing our current human resources coordinator and our director of digital learning, and we were to reassign the HR department and responsibilities to the office of the assistant superintendent, carve out the curriculum and instruction work that Dr. Cleary has been doing, and assign that to a director of curriculum and instruction. And so Dr. Cleary would become assistant superintendent. We'd remove the title of curriculum and instruction, and she would be a traditional assistant superintendent. And with the many things that she does beyond the curriculum work already, she would be overseeing all of the HR department. And there would still be there would be 2 positions in HR. We'd remove the coordinator, and so we currently, right now, have the coordinator, a generalist, and an administrative assistant. The administrative assistant, we brought on, this year we created the new generalist position, and so in our budget, we're keeping that position, but we would be eliminating the coordinator position, and the leadership of that department would be taken over by Dr. Cleary. So that's that proposal. We could talk more specifically about it. The next piece would be, we have our principal aides that help supervise lunch and recess in our pre-K to 8 buildings. We are proposing that we reduce their hours by 1 at the grades in grades 3 to 5, and by a half hour in grades, it should say pre-K to 2. But the idea of it being somewhat different, knowing that the younger students, I think, the additional time for supervision, I feel, would be appropriate there. And so that is something that we've talked about with the principals. We've looked at the structure of the day. We've looked at the length of lunches and recess and the time span throughout that day. Some of that time was increased when we were looking at when we went into the hybrid model and we took lunches off the table. We'd adjusted the responsibilities and brought them in earlier in the day, because lunches didn't exist, and then we brought lunches back. We kind of readjusted that. And so we're looking that, we believe that we'd be able to recognize that savings if we were to do that. And then the last piece is, we currently have 15 reading interventionists who support our students in pre-K through 5. And so if we were to reduce 4 of those, it would be a cost savings of $83,498. And what we'd be doing is we'd be restructuring the MTSS model specifically. There would still be these resources in all of our schools. We would just be reducing the number of staff there. And we had a long conversation with the principals about that as well. And Dr. Cleary, you could speak more articulately to that.
Sure. So MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered System of Support. So this is our support system to help provide the necessary supports in place for students who are struggling, up through students who are advancing beyond grade level. In theory, it's supposed to be for academics as well as social emotional, so different tiers of support. In this case, we're talking about academics, and we're talking more specifically about the reading support. In the elementary level, we have 2 types of staff members who support reading. One is the literacy specialist, and that is a licensed, certified, highly trained individual who is an expert in reading. We have 2 of those at each elementary school at the pre-K to 2 level, and 1 of those at each 3 to 5 school. That is not the position we're talking about. We're talking about the second type of intervention staff member that we have, and those are our RIs, our reading interventionists. They are not necessarily certified staff. Some of them are, and chose to, scale back their job and not do full-time teaching, but it is not a requirement for this job, and there's no particular level of schooling for this job. Now, these people are talented and are very, very beneficial to students because our curriculum coordinators have trained them so well that they really have become reading experts too. So in this model, we have, for the RIs, the reading interventionists, we have 2 at each school at the K to 2s, and 3 at each grade 3 through 5 school. So there's a total of 15 in the district. They service small groups of students at a time, anywhere typically between 2 and 3 students are in one group. They're considered our Tier 2 model. And they've offered so much in our MTSS structure. Now, none of these adjustments are anything I think that we would come forward when it comes to eliminating any sort of reading support. However, we feel as though we could continue providing adequate support for our struggling students with eliminating these 4. So if there were additional money, it wouldn't be anything that would voluntarily be coming saying, let's reduce our reading interventionists. But that said, we currently have 15. If we reduced 4, it would be down to 11. The way that they're deployed now, it's an equal amount of RIs at each of the schools. So the 3 to 5 each has 3 RIs. The K to 2s have 2. And I'm saying K to 2 instead of pre-K to 2 because the pre-K doesn't access this support. But we do have a discrepancy of a swing of 67 students in the pre-K to 2 schools from our lowest enrolled to our highest enrolled, yet they have the same amount. And then a swing of 51 students from our lowest enrolled 3 to 5 school to our highest enrolled. So we feel as though, in terms of equity, it doesn't have to mean equal or it doesn't mean equal. So we feel that centralizing, so to speak, the 11 remaining RIs and using our fall data to say, and establishing a cutoff, and then deploying them to where the needs are for the individual students would be an efficient way to use them and could yield a $83,000 savings. Currently, especially with our lesser enrolled schools compared to others, there is room beyond what is established as our cutoff for teachers to say, oh, you know, this particular student I feel like could benefit for some additional time with a reading interventionist. And there's room to absorb some of these add-ons, which is a wonderful bonus for classroom teachers, for students. But in terms of the true tier model, it would be perfectly appropriate to assume we're going to establish that cutoff for what qualifies tier 2 and then consolidate those roles and deploy them to where the student need is.
Carrie, in that model, do you anticipate RIs going to multiple buildings in a day? Do you anticipate them sort of being, you know, established in one building? How does that look? Because my concern here is, obviously I'm concerned about the reading interventionists in general, but my concern is also the relationship that they develop with the students and the consistency of that relationship. So how do you see them being, you're using the word deployed, how do you see them being deployed?
So I do, the way that I envision it is that they would be at a particular school based on need, but I'd need the data to see that. I don't see them running around to multiple schools. Perhaps there might be a scenario where somebody is assigned to 2 schools. I'm not concerned at all about relationships with students because they would be consistently seeing those students for the duration of time that those students need that support. I think the major cost would be the fact that might they feel less connected to a building in terms of building morale and feeling like that's part of their family, if they may come mid-year assessments be needed at a different school. So that would be a major cost to this type of benefit.
Can I just,
Yep.
I wanted to ask, do we want to do questions now? Because we we didn't do questions on the first 2, and so I don't
Sorry.
know. Do you
Yep.
want to?
Sorry.
This is
Do you want to
the,
keep going, or
this
do you
is
want to
the-
focus on this and talk about this now?
this is the end of that updated
Of the
information.
new information.
You did,
We didn't,
Pat, were you able to share the transportation?
I was, but really late at 5:30.
Yeah, because it happened late this afternoon, so that's something that I just want you to have that information, because, and we can talk about that even on the 14th. We just wanted, it literally, Pat got the information late this afternoon, and so I wanted you to have
Thank
that
you.
as well, too. So we'll make sure, I don't think it was uploaded to the packet, but we'll put that memo in the packet, which has the information about the potential transportation information as well.
so you're okay if we open the,
I am. So
open the
in
floodgates, so to
so
speak?
in the, well, yeah, in the, always love a good floodgate. And for the rest of the presentation, it's the original slides. We did put a little comment on the original overview to remind people that this is no longer accurate, but my intent was just to keep it together so that we have it all in one place. If anyone finds that confusing, I certainly apologize, and we can make sure that we are more clear in other ways. But yeah, with that, I think if you have some questions, we can certainly answer questions. We also have the 14th to continue to deliberate, so if we don't have answers to your questions, we can certainly get answers before the 14th.
and I don't remember last week or last meeting how much we went into the previous set of reductions that you presented. I don't remember if we did a thorough question and answer on that, so.
We talked a little bit about it. I think the difference is that we were living in this like flexible, when is that number gonna change?
Exactly.
And now, even though there is still some room for movement, and I think now though we've targeted, if we have more money, we would remove the reading interventionists from this list first, and then if we had additional funds, we would then remove the principal aides.
Okay. But I would say those are obviously still open for questions and conversation and
Yep.
deliberation. So just remember that. That's later in the presentation. So it's basically those 2 slides kind of cover what we're talking about for the most part. Valerie, you had
I feel like
you
I
had a
just have
question?
a quick add-on to Alicia's point, I apologize for my ignorance, but do reading interventionists have, like, in our model right now, do they have like a classroom? What do they, Like, what, if in the model that they have to switch mid-year or something, what are they,
Like
how
their
much
space,
disruption is that? Yeah.
their physical space.
They have designated sections in the building. It depends from building to building. It's different. They all have.
Some are all working in one room with
Mm,
different
mm.
students, some
Right.
have different spaces, depending on the facilities.
So there's room designated for RIs at each of the 6 buildings.
And correct me if I'm wrong, a child may not have reading intervention or math intervention for the entire year. They may have it in the beginning of the year and then sort of not need it anymore. They may be flagged in the middle of the year. That can be fluid. That population can be fluid as the assessment moves through the year.
That was my question, is what's the frequency with which that gets reevaluated for any given student?
Right. It varies. It can be anywhere from 10 weeks to the entire year. In this model, we would look at certainly anybody could graduate out or
Right.
come in, but more formally, we would sort of re-centralize, maybe not literally, but figuratively, look at the data in the middle of the year, our January benchmark data.
So we're not
as
talking
the second round.
2 weeks, 3 weeks, we're talking longer
Yes,
periods of
right, right,
time.
right.
It's not that fluid.
Correct.
Yeah.
Catherine?
Can I ask, how many hours each day do we have the reading interventionists in for?
So it's 4 hours at the K to 2s and 5 hours at the 3 through 5.
5 hours at 3 to 5.
Correct.
And each block, generally, I'm assuming with the reading interventionist, is 30 minutes.
That's right.
And does that 4 hours, they're working those 4 hours, or is they're contracted to have, there's no break in that, or what?
They are working most of those 4 hours. The coordinator did build in some additional planning time within their 4-hour span.
Okay. So, 3.
I had a question, I don't know if we want to jump around, but I'm going to, about the HR and central office changes. Can you talk a little bit, I know you had mentioned to me that this is very much in line with what, I don't remember your word, if you said a lot of districts or most districts. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
I think there are typically 2 different models, right? There are a lot of assistant superintendents of curriculum and instruction. But there are also a lot of assistant superintendents who might be, I said 2 models, there's different ways,
Sure.
right? Because even here in Westford, the history has changed, right? There's been an assistant superintendent who is focusing on finance, right? There's been an assistant superintendent who's focusing on curriculum and instruction. What I think the more traditional model, if you look over time, is that you have a superintendent and then you have an assistant superintendent, right? And it's not of a specific thing. But you will find models where there will, especially in larger towns, where they might have an assistant superintendent of finance, an assistant superintendent of HR, an assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction. But this idea of an assistant superintendent overseeing human resources is actually quite common. Okay. That one of the leaders, whether it's the superintendent or, and again, more commonly the assistant superintendent, would be overseeing negotiations, the evaluation system, professional development, different aspects of just even the training for new staff as well too. Yeah. All of that aspects of things. So you can see a number of different examples of it.
And I think it's a good thing that we are open to being flexible and looking at restructuring based on the circumstances, based on the personnel we have and their experience and their skill base. So, I don't think it's a bad thing to occasionally reevaluate that and say, oh, this makes sense at this time for the.
I will also say, and this, I hope nobody takes this the wrong way, and this shouldn't be a knock to any specific organization or group, but within the educational system, it is, I think you will find more people who are qualified and interested in leading curriculum than you will within the education system finding people who are able to effectively lead the HR department.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're very fortunate that I think Dr. Cleary's skill set is such that she can do that. But I do believe that by creating a director of curriculum position, that is something that we would have a lot of interest and a lot of qualified people who would be interested in that work in education. Would you say that's fair?
Sure.
I mean, especially you being qualified for it.
That's what I was talking about.
And interested too, I think.
If we're gonna hang on this topic for a minute, can you walk us through, and I know like this might be a newbie question, but like normally we would have, at some point we would have like updated job descriptions, right?
Yeah.
Not tonight, but I would be interested to see sort of a high level of like sort of what Carrie's, I mean, obviously Carrie's been here several years, we haven't seen her job description, you know, it hasn't needed to come across us as far, at least since I've been here. But like what your breakdown in time has been to, cause I guess from my point of view, I'm like, oh, I thought like curriculum was the biggest chunk of stuff you did, so I'm trying to figure out how HR like steps into that puzzle piece. Does that make sense? So some sort of, not the job descriptions turnaround, but like some sort of high level breakdown of how those puzzle pieces and roles work together. Is that fair?
Sure.
I agree with that because I'm picturing in my head a flow chart that we saw a couple of years ago where it was like the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, the curriculum coordinators, and everything should have sort of gone up like this, but at one point it went this way to Carrie and then sort of back again. So it sounds to me that this is a reorganization of those resources, and I'd like to think that eventually that means that under the superintendent and the assistant superintendent, we have these pods of directors, and eventually a director of equity and inclusion could be fit in there, and whatever other, you know, directors of that make sense, because we have our director of finance, we have our director of student services. So this logically, it scares me a little bit, but this logically does make sense to me in that overall structure. So I would agree. I'd love to see the description of what it looks like now and what you envision it looking like going forward.
Yeah, like a before and after org chart, roughly, or something like that, yeah,
Sure.
that'd be good. Other questions?
No, you go.
I would be interested also in like a visual representation of the lunch and recess schedules for the principal aides. And obviously I hear you having that conversation with the principals, and they are much more well-equipped with that, you know, timing than I am, but would just be nice to do that due diligence to kind of see it laid out and where that extra time is coming from.
Can I circle back to the reading interventionists if nobody has any other questions? I'll be honest, that line was tough to read earlier, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about it. As a teacher, as a parent of kids who have IEPs and been through all of that, and know many families through CPAC, and also considering the time we've come through it, we're currently in and still trying to come back from last year. And I did a bit of math. I'm not very good. Don't ask me to do it on the board. But, you know, what does 4 RIs actually look at? Like, because for me, this is something that directly impacts the kid in front of us, and I will always come from that place. So I took a minimum of, at the K-2s, you said roughly 4 hours. I said, let's do 3. And then 3 hours, which is 6 groups, which is potentially 3 kids per group, or slots, because some kids get more than one intervention, more than one slot per week. And 4 hours, say up at the 3 to 5 buildings, 6 groups, 3 kids, so that's 24 kids. That's per reading interventionist per day, 5 days a week. And I kind of, you know, I just looked at is this actually looking like? And it's the numbers, even assuming that each student sees a reading interventionist twice a week, that 105 students potentially a week will not be getting that reading intervention time. Now, it could be really wrong in the math. I'll go back over it when I get home again, but that to me seems like too much of a jump for what $84,000 actually gets us. We have teachers right now telling us that they are dealing with kids who have anxiety, you know, social emotional issues. They're trying to catch up from last year. You know, probably behavioral issues, which is possibly disrupting lessons. It just doesn't sit right with me right now that this is something we would be considering for $84,000. I know it's not nothing, but when we're talking in a budget that's, can't remember.
63 million.
There you go. The percentage, but the impact. We also know that the K-5 is crucial in terms of reading intervention and screening for dyslexia. And to reduce those that second tier, you know, personnel, to potentially catch students who do have dyslexia, because we know the big thing for kids with dyslexia is really the earlier they get intervention, the bigger the impact throughout the rest of middle school and high school. So actually, we're potentially if we try and keep these 4 interventionists, we are potentially keeping, yes, it might cost us $84,000 now, but we're potentially reducing, you know, out of district placements or something for students who we know it happens that go through the system until we get to a bigger problem down the road. And then we're potentially looking at a tuition budget for one student that's more than this. So, Pat, is there any chance you have a magic wand somewhere?
That's what I was gonna, I mean, I would just say, just remember that 84 would have to come from somewhere else.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so, there, you know, there has been an analysis. Thankfully, the numbers have changed such that the next 5, 6 things that would have been presented tonight aren't being presented tonight, right? I mean, there were probably
less-
5 or 6, or I don't know how many other things that our team has been looking at, but, you know, I think
Less
that's,
copier paper? I
that's-
don't know. I mean,
we can talk about
It may-
how well we funded our maintenance budgets, but I'm sure you have some,
Yeah.
some thoughts.
I
yeah.
do. And, you know, it feels a little funny because by no means are we in support of cutting our eyes, right?
No.
Dr. Chu has been charged to bring to you a balanced budget. And in this budget, this particular adjustment would still provide us the opportunity to have a solid Tier 2 program for students. So that's why it was able to make it on here. So it feels funny just kind of offering a counter argument to what you're saying, because by no means do I want to fully advocate to cut our eyes, but it's here because we have 181 students in grade K-5 who are currently receiving RI services. And so 181 divided by the 15 we have is approximately 12 or so students on each person's caseload. So that would increase, if we came down to 11, to 16 or 17 per RI caseload. And so if you take 16 or 17 students and you put them in groups of 3, which is more than appropriate for a small group, they could cover up to 18 students in a 3-hour span. So the number of students that we do have, we did the math and certainly could fit within the 11 proposed that would remain, receiving the time that they should, in terms of it's actually 4 to 5 times a week that they're seen for those 30-minute blocks, and not increase small group sizes to, you know, beyond 5, which would then be concerning in terms of a process, but that 3 to 5 is what is common, and so that would be, they would be able to have 3 per group.
do we know then, you know, in terms of students in the district, who would be, you know, with the diagnosis of something like dyslexia, where they are in terms of middle, high school with interventions, you know, and are we paying for out-of-district tuitions for students with that disability, that learning disability?
I don't have that information on me, but I do want to separate the Tier 2 through special education services. Tier 2, which is our entire RI caseload, is very much a general education support. It's a double dose. So the students who you're talking about who may have a specific learning disability, such as dyslexia, who can't access the curriculum, would not even be receiving services from an RI. They would need more specialized support
I
per their
understand that,
IEP.
Carrie, but generally what's supposed to happen is they start from Tier 1, they go to Tier 2, and then they move up. So there are students who don't necessarily get picked up as with having dyslexia for various reasons, as we know. And it's those Tier 2, that Tier 3 that are putting those safeguards into place to try and make sure that we catch those students as early as we can. So it's one thing to come into kindergarten with the dyslexia diagnosis. I mean, it doesn't happen that often. And you know yourself, it can take 2 or 3 years before a student might actually be caught as and diagnosed with having dyslexia. So we're potentially now in 3rd grade, maybe, if we're lucky, and we know that 4th grade is you know, that is the big cutoff if we really want to make an impact. So while the Tier 2 isn't necessarily, you know, a special education, it's a big net to catch those students that we now have that the Massachusetts law in terms of.
And
It's
I
a
think
diagnostic speed bump.
Those students
Exactly,
would
yeah.
be, we would be signaled from our benchmark assessments
Yeah.
that there are gaps for those students, even if it was prior to any diagnosis, and therefore they would qualify. So we're not proposing anything that would make students who currently qualify per the data no longer qualify anymore.
Right. But I think, if I may,
Yeah.
I'm interpreting it as a Tier 2 intervention is like a diagnostic speed bump. It's another place where a kid might be caught. So I can see how it would be concerning. Tier 3, if you're talking about a child who has a dyslexia diagnosis, Tier 3 is a whole other issue, a whole other bucket. But I can see the concern of that diagnostic speed bump along the way where a child could get flagged for services.
And I'm basing this off, Sean, I know you attended it, I think, as well as you, Alicia, the CPAC open house we had with Dr. Chu and Jen Traverso in November. And one of the things that I think kind of came out of it or was questioned by the group was what we were kind of assuming was a dyslexia screening, or at least what had been marketed as a dyslexia screening, wasn't necessarily a dyslexia screening based on the information Jen was giving us that day. She was saying, we're doing the assessment, say, in the fall, we're finding out if a student in front of us has skills that are lagging and what areas that may be. That isn't necessarily saying to anyone if this child has dyslexia, but if they have skills that are lagging, we are going to put them into Tier 2 intervention to see if we can help with those skills. But they're not necessarily, and I think that was the kind of the conversation that went that day, correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, parents came away with we had gone in assuming that if you showed lagging skills, that there was a question mark for dyslexia, and that maybe parents would be kind of said, this is something we're going to watch for or see. But that didn't necessarily seem to be what Jen was saying this screening was for, that we were just going to work with these students to build up these skills in the Tier 2 and still not necessarily have a diagnosis for them.
Well, because the Tier 2 intervention is not a screener for dyslexia.
Exactly, yeah.
It's not, that is not a screener for. It is a chance when a student is in front of a teacher that they may see something that may be
Exactly.
flagged, but Tier 2 intervention is not a screener for
Yeah.
Tier 3 services.
And we're not
That's
removing tier 2 from any students.
correct.
You
We're
know,
increasing the
and
number
you
of
kind of went through
students
the
at the
math.
table.
I mean, but, you know, the cruder math is, it's probably a reduction of individual, if you think about reading interventionist time with students, and if maybe we're increasing the number of students per time or decreasing the session time, it's probably about a 25% reduction in that, in that time per student, when you spread it all out. So is there a chance that speed bump effect is lessened somewhat? It could be, right? It could be. But we're not removing those services from anybody.
Is this the year to do it? I mean, that's the other thing, the timing, considering what we're coming out of. I mean, is there a situation where we could actually apply for something like ARPA funding? It's a one-off, it directly impacts students, and it gives us, I mean, these are K-5 students. They're literally in year 3 of COVID. So 3 of their 6 years of school has now been impacted, so.
Can you talk?
It is difficult, because back to what Dr. Cleary said, it sounds as if we're advocating for this
Oh, I get
piece,
that,
right? And
yeah.
I feel like I just need to be clear. I'm charged to bring you a balanced budget. That's actually what you asked me to do
Yep.
for tonight.
Yep.
And so that's what we did. And I will say, there were other things on the list that I'm not at all remotely comfortable talking about. I don't like this. And one of the things that I did try to say earlier, and maybe I didn't say it clear enough, I was hoping that tonight there was no more discussion of flexibility in terms of the number, but because that could be in our favor, and I know it's not gonna get worse, I am optimistic about that, and I do know that the town manager is still trying to, I mean, we've been collaborating a great deal, and so I know that there's still possible movement with this 225 number. I just don't know specifically what it is yet, because there's just still some variables that she has. But it is awkward, because it's the idea is that, no, we don't think that reducing our interventions is a good idea. But in having to come up with a balanced budget, this is one of those things on that proposal.
So
I want to make sure,
I was just gonna say, and so the public understands that the governor's budget just dropped last week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and like we all know the cherry sheets that come out for, your Chapter 70 funding, all that stuff just dropped last week. So there is still a little bit more tweaking that may need to happen.
so I want to make sure we're getting to new questions and new thoughts, if there are any. But I want to throw 2 things out that if you want to speak to and you think will add context, please do. If you don't think it's that relevant, please don't. With regard to the reading interventionists, one is if there's any historical context you want to provide as far as the numbers over time and how they've fluctuated over time. I don't know if it's pertinent or not. The other would be, we've talked about, is this the year, or we're playing catch up? And I'm trying to understand, like, how do we feel about, like, the reading interventionist role in what may be a perceived learning loss or whatever that we've talked about in the past.
We can definitely get you historical data.
I'm not saying I need,
No. Yeah.
if there was something off the top of your head that made sense to give context, I was gonna open it up, but I don't personally, I know it has fluctuated. I think we always are looking at the numbers and saying what makes sense for this time, so I don't,
Sure. Yeah, we'll take a look at that.
Okay. Thanks.
But and to somebody's point, and we'll see how far this goes in the case that there's flexibility, but there are things that we have requested with ARPA funds, as you all know, that are in theory ongoing costs, but we're using this one-time money just to help us recover, knowing that we won't be able to continue to do those. So for example, the 5th hour for the math interventions, we were able to do it last year with COVID funds, again this year with COVID funds, and it was proposed in the budget from the coordinators to me, not approved, couldn't support it financially. And so buying another year of it even though beyond that, we know, and similar to Lexia as well. It would be great to have that every single year. It's a very expensive program. We had it last year and this year using grant funds. In theory, if we adopt it, it would be a reoccurring cost every year. We are not able to find that now in our budget, so one more year of being able to extend that support is worthwhile in our opinion.
Thank you. Other budget questions for today? Okay. Well, thank you for the updates. There'll be more to come potentially, so stay tuned 2 weeks from tonight. And with that, we'll move on to the financial update.
Good evening, everyone. So first thing we're going to talk about is the FY22 budget, because we're deep into FY23 planning, but we're deep into FY22 execution. This is a budget, well, first of all, right off the bat, I am so sorry to say, we still don't have the $89,008 from the state, which I thought we had gotten across the finish line. I was told it would be within like the first week that we came back in January, but lo and behold, the money has yet to arrive. So we'll get it. It's just an
They
endeavor.
don't know what they started with you.
As I say, I am a wife and mother of 4. I can take nagging to new heights.
Yeah. I'm not worried about it because
Yeah.
I know that you guys did.
I'm almost sad for the day when when the saga's over, but not
Yes,
really.
that's right, that's right. Okay, so the ongoing monitoring of the FY22 budget is pretty intense. You know, it's not a budget I built, right? So it's kind of, it takes a lot of monitoring. We're getting hit pretty hard with out-of-district, both tuition and transportation. So we're really monitoring it. So that's a bit of a challenge, and that's what's causing a lot of our overages and transfers, in addition to just ongoing transfers that happen with a budget that's crafted, 16, 18 months ahead of time. The portion of the budget for buildings and grounds, at this point, I'm sort of keeping them separate because I'm hoping that if there's some extra money, he'll be okay to get some pressing needs done. Although I said that to him the other day and he laughed at me. He said, extra money, there's a concept. So we're monitoring it. We're hoping that it can be self-sustaining. It's about $4.7 million of the budget, so it's not a small amount of money, but whether it can be self-sustaining remains to be seen. Not all of the budgets, the offsets have been applied to the FY22 budget, but they have been considered in my projection, with the exception of school choice, because once you move school choice over, you can't move it back. So I think that takes like some active management, best done a little later in the fiscal year. And the district has already notified the state that we're going to try for some extraordinary relief based on our increase out of district tuition monies. It's a new process. Training will be a new process for the district. The trainings will occur in March. Whether it yields any money or not, I don't really know yet, but it's certainly worth the effort. The projected balance as we stand right now, you'll see there at about $1 million. However, we have an obligation for almost $385,000 in longevity payments, which occurs in June. And we think we are facing another $185,000 in additional out-of-district tuitions. I have to say, since I did this projection, we also needed to hire a teacher assistant based on a student need, a new student need. The problem with a statement like that, which I just said, is that carries over to a need in the FY23 budget, which isn't reflected in there, right? That's why you need some flexibility in a budget at all times, right? Because you do the very best you can, and then things in the current year change, which will affect the future year. It's unavoidable, but that's the world we live in with budgets. And then in addition, you'll see there an updated projection of about $430,000, but that includes the per pupil. I would suspect everyone at the table understand what that means. That's the money that are given to each schools to meet their individual needs. We froze that when we started to see some out of control expenditures, and we're like, you know what, we need to kind of regroup a little bit. I hope to be able to free up some money for them as we get a little later on. We told them by March 15th, we would tell the principals if they could maybe, get a few of the things that they need. But this is just a very active monitoring process at this time. However, having said that, this does not reflect the offset of school choice. So that's important to remember when you look at the numbers.
Can you remind what, the longevity monies are?
Certainly. Longevity are contractual obligations based on staff members' levels, years of service. So it's not unusual that, at the 10-year mark you get some money, at 15-year mark you get some money. It's not in your salary throughout the year, it's a lump payment in June.
Pat, is there a tipping point where you would recommend that we start looking at the Special Education Reserve Fund? The one that has to be taken out by the school committee and the select board at the same time?
I mean,
Knowing that that can
I would
only be
think we would
spent.
have to be projecting that we have no money left in the budget, and we're not close to that.
Okay.
We're not close to that. My hope is that we are so vigilant about maintaining our management of the budget that maybe we could think about making a deposit at the end of the year.
Okay.
But it's too early, it's only January.
And just a reminder to everyone, that is not just determined by us. We put money in, but we have to make that vote with the select board also. It takes both boards to pull it back out,
Pull
so.
it back out, right. I've been doing a little research. I have to tell you, the fact that ours is about, I think it's about 230, 250, that's really low. I've
Yes.
been looking around, it really is.
It is.
So I would say that it would be a district goal to get that built up a bit,
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely.
yeah.
And we've only had it I want to say 3 years.
I think it's 3 years,
This is our
yeah.
third year, I think, so it's relatively new, but yes,
It
I
is,
think
yeah.
we all agree with that. That would be a goal. And you said vigilance, and I think, like, this memo, to me, is indicative of your vigilance of the budget, and I really, really appreciate it. I thought this was so helpful.
Yeah.
It's such a helpful
Seriously.
snapshot of where things are, and really appreciate it.
Great, great. I should give credit where credit is due. It's a joint effort of my team.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just to go back to it, the current balance for the special ed reserve fund is 276.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
I was just gonna jump on that, the narrative, like, in the bullets is just,
Yeah.
it's not just
Yep.
this, this is the numbers. The narrative is so valuable.
Well, sometimes it's hard to interpret the numbers, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Having said that, I'm gonna lead into, here's the numbers for that. So we did add the,
Like, you'll be describing them, and I'm like, oh, I get that. And then we end the conversation, and I'm like, wait, what did she say?
I got it for a second.
Yeah, so that I go back and read the words part.
we did add food service to, the quarterly reports. Don't look at the starting balances though, because it had been done as a lump sum and we broke it out by school, so we just kind of delineated ourselves. I wouldn't pay attention to that at this point, and the reason that you see, revenue in the second quarter is because that's when we start to get the federal and state reimbursement monies back for the lunches served. And we're monitoring all of the grants. In fact, we're doing some final reports for some of them. And we're monitoring all around. We're monitoring all of our revolving accounts. Just monitoring.
That's great. Other questions? Thank you again. Let us know what we can do to support, but this is really, really helpful.
Great. To touch upon something that Dr. Chu said, we did kind of reach a agreement with D-Transportation. It didn't come out till about 5:30, and you were probably already driving here for your 6 o'clock, so I shared it, but I knew it would kind of get lost in the sauce. I believe it's just a positive event for the district, and the recommendation from administration is in the memo along with the details.
Yep. Great.
Okay?
In the finance subcommittee, did we talk about whether that's not actually a vote, right? Did we talk about that?
It is a vote based
Yeah, I
on the
was gonna
size
say,
of the
so
contract.
Are you, when would we anticipate this coming on an agenda?
So I guess that would be the school committee's decision. We could talk about it. As far as I'm concerned, the work has been done, the
So
recommendation
it
is
could
in the
be,
memo.
it could be imminent.
Yeah.
Yeah, we wanted you to have the information tonight, which is why we're giving it to you, because we didn't want to, but we know that, I mean, it could be on the agenda to discuss
Yep.
at the next meeting and then vote
That's
on
probably
the
what
next
we
one,
would
or whatever the case may be. That's why we just didn't want to wait until the next meeting
Yeah.
to give it to you,
Right.
because that was just then delaying it.
And it got added to the packet.
So it
Or it's
will,
going
it
to
was
be. It's
after,
going
it
to
was
be.
after
It'll be added
hours.
tomorrow, right.
Right, so I've already emailed it tonight. I requested that you put it in tomorrow.
Great.
Okay. Thank you,
Thanks a
everyone.
lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Okay, let's move on to our COVID update. And I just pulled up the website, and because I hadn't done that in a few days. Thank goodness it looks like it does today versus what it looked like on
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah, I feel like, the new way of reporting it, I think is helpful for people. The original dashboard takes us all the way up to when we changed our system. I made sure that the previous information is in there just so people have that. And it does continue to deal with the case counts in the town as well too, so we can see that information. So we did shift to our new testing program. And so test and stay is no longer taking place, nor is contact tracing taking place in schools, specifically. We have, let me look at these numbers here. As of right now, we have 456 staff members who have opted into the at-home testing. And so we have those tests available for staff members to take home, and then they would test for Monday. So it could be Monday morning, it could be Sunday night, but the idea being is that they'll, if they choose to participate, they'll test, and then if they just report positive results if they have them. Again, it's an optional thing for people to be participating in. And we have, as of right now, we have 1,382 students under 18 and 32 students over 18. They just did different forms, so that's the way I'm breaking that down, right? And this is something that can change. People who have not opted in can opt in later. People who have opted in can decide, yeah, no, I'm good, and no longer receive. What happens is that we continue to update this number with CIC Health, and that will determine the number of tests we get to distribute.
And that's for the at-home testing.
That's for the at-home testing. So we're doing symptomatic testing in schools, and that is for anybody who is developing symptoms while they're in school. If you have any symptoms, we still want people to stay home. Stay home, stay home, stay home if you've developed symptoms at home. The purpose of the symptomatic testing is that if all of a sudden in the middle of the school day, someone is starting to not feel well, they could go to the nurse, and the nurse can do it. I mean, they would normally do their assessment. They would do an assessment in general. And so if they feel like a potential COVID test is warranted at that moment in time, then if the parent has already signed up for that option in CIC Health, then they'd be able to do that. If not, they might still be able to talk with them that piece of it. I think it's better if people want their child to have that access, that they sign up ahead of time. That is absolutely the easier thing.
Chris, sorry, can I interrupt
Yeah,
you? a
please.
bit?
No,
Okay.
no, that's good.
And where are for the families who do opt in, where are the tests getting sent?
So the at-home tests are going to go to the schools.
Okay.
And so ideally what we want to do is, and we haven't received them for the students yet, we're receiving them this week, because then the students would start next week. So the staff do it one week, the students do it the next week. That's the way that they're distributing the test to us. So they did send us the tests for the staff last week, and we got them on Thursday. And so for the students, what we're looking at is it would certainly be easier on everybody if the test can go home with the student, right? Go home in the student's bag. That would be the easiest thing. We're working with the principals and the nurses and our district coordinator to just verify all that logistics before that happens at the end of this week.
Could be an interesting bus ride home for some of those younger kids. I don't know.
Well, yeah.
We all tested on the bus ride.
The ideal scenario would be that they could responsibly go home,
Right.
with the student, as opposed to it requiring an additional pickup.
Yeah, yeah.
But hey, you know what? We've done so many Chromebook pickups
I
and
was
drop
gonna say,
offs,
yeah.
and that
Yeah,
we
that's a
have
good
ways
point.
to do it.
Yeah.
It's just we would rather not go back to,
Yes.
having to do that if not.
But likewise, the students have been carrying, most students have been
Yeah.
carrying
Chromebooks.
Chromebooks back and forth,
Right.
so maybe
Yeah.
they can handle it.
That's what I'm
totally.
saying.
I think they
I'm
can
thinking
handle
that
it. I
too.
just wish, Mr. Sanders didn't just throw out the
I'm
idea.
sorry.
Maybe not making it home, because that might not have been
Find some wood to
what
knock on.
everybody's
I
eyes.
think I actually think it will be fine.
Chris was a curious
I am
child.
not. I'm not concerned at all. And I think the Chromebooks are a great example,
Yeah.
right? Similar size, I imagine. Similar.
Smaller. I mean,
Also,
it is the same little box that has 2 tests in it. so that-
also somewhat fragile. You want to be careful with it, like you would your Chromebook. So I think it's analogous, and I apologize. I retract my previous.
I will say, well, the good,
It's still gonna be in the minutes,
The good
Chris.
piece of it is that people have opted in, and so like parents know that should be expected,
Yeah.
right?
And if the test comes home damaged or used or whatever, there's going to be a conversation
Right,
with
right.
Yeah.
said child about what happens next week. So
Consequences.
I'm not
yeah.
worried about that.
Can you go back to where you said it was fluid? Because at least when I, as a parent, read the communication last week and it said like, sign up by January 27th, that read to me like a sort of a finite.
So we needed it to know this number for this week, because what happened is the state, when we first said we were opting into this, I gave the state our staff number, knowing that the staff wouldn't have time to turn around. So we got enough for everybody last week. Now we have an accurate number moving forward of people who want to participate. So the difference, we had that date in there so that we could hit the deadline for the ordering, but we will continue to communicate that if people didn't opt in, they still can.
So you could opt in, you just might not get tests home sent that day.
That's right,
You have to
that's
like
right.
kind of wait for it to
That's
trickle
right.
into the
Next
system.
round. That's right.
Got it. So
Yeah.
I just, from a inbox parent point of view, to kind of reiterate that.
I'll send, I'm
in
planning to
some-
send out a February 1st
Got it.
update tomorrow, so
Oh,
I will
great.
add that in there.
And for the symptomatic, if they already signed up prior,
It's
like
all
in the
set.
fall, it's all set. If you try to fill it out again, what happens? Because I started, I'm like.
You actually can, because some people filled it out twice for their
Yeah,
kids.
that's what I
So
started.
that did happen. Sometimes if they weren't sure if it worked, they did it twice. So that's possible. One important thing, which I'll also remind people tomorrow, is we did have a couple of questions of people who, if they had provided consent for test and stay, but they don't want symptomatic testing taking place for some reason, they just need to email the principal or the nurse to rescind that.
Mm.
And then they don't have to go in to see it. It actually, someone administratively from the school would just be able to say, okay, you don't want that. Because if you remember, the way that is set up, and we were not allowed to change it, was you gave consent for all three, and we were only doing test and stay, but you were giving consent for pool testing and for symptomatic, and there are some people who didn't want to do that.
Without creating a work task for someone, can you briefly explain if a child or a student is symptomatic during the day and is at the nurse's office, is there any, and that child has been sort of previously opted in, is there any parent notification that comes out of that visit?
Well,
Would a parent know that their kid got COVID tested that day?
that's a good question. If it was positive, absolutely, right, because that's gonna be the phone
Right,
call
right,
coming
right,
down.
right. Right.
I feel like, the purpose of the consent is that the nurse might not have time to call you before doing this, right? But if you've already provided consent, then they can certainly test, and then I think, the majority of our nurses, their goal is to communicate visits to families.
Right.
I think we do know that there could be a high volume, and making a call that day to let somebody know that their child tested negative might not, I don't want to promise that would happen. I do know that is their goal, that they're constantly communicating when students are visiting them, because they're logging everything that's taking place. And I would think that, they would want to let somebody know that it was a negative test as well too. We just haven't said that they absolutely would call you,
Of course.
within so much time as to when that happened.
And if a student is symptomatic, there's a decent chance that there might be a call anyway to say, come
Well,
pick
most
up,
likely
come pick
that-
up your student. You know,
That's
they
the
don't
bigger
feel well.
piece, is that the nurses, I think, are very clear about, and one of the things that they I think consistently are sharing with me is just that, in most cases, the student's gonna be going home. When a student's not feeling well, most of the time, the students need to go home. Like, that is normally what happens, right? They'll do an assessment to kind of figure out what the scenario is, because it might be something like a student has a headache and does just need, a moment or some type of, Tylenol or aspirin, and then can go back to class. And if they think that the student can go back to class, then they certainly do. But if the student is not feeling well, the student, under most circumstances, would still be going home.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for the update.
I appreciate you having my only question was gonna be the numbers, so I appreciate you having the number.
Yeah.
Ready to go.
Okay,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
all in favor?